the Admiral of Hogwarts. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 276 The Crucible. After leaving Massachusetts, Intrepid, and Salem to sort through the pile of documents in the attic, Hugo followed Split directly to the Balkan region because the flames of war had died down. The Soviets had been hoping Hugo could visit this place, and now with his subdimension, Hugo could take this opportunity to see the future home port of the ship girls in this world. Hugo and the others emerged from a house next to Tartini Square. The original owner of this house had fled to Canada to escape the war, so the Soviets bought it. Tartini Square is the most prominent square in the game's background image. It was originally the inner harbor of Pirin, but it was filled in 1894 and turned into its current form because it was quite late. Hugo quickly washed up under Split's guidance and fell asleep in the bedroom of this house. The next morning around 9 o'clock, Hugo woke up from bed. After all, he had spent several hours in the mountainous area of the Alps the night before and went to bed very late. Marshall, you're awake. As Hugo walked down the stairs to have breakfast, he saw Split placing the freshly prepared breakfast on the table. Yes, aren't you having breakfast? Seeing only one plate of food and a set of cutlery on the table, Hugo asked with some confusion. Although ship girls don't actually need to eat, most of them have habits similar to humans, meaning that as long as they are not busy, they will eat and sleep like normal humans. I already ate breakfast this morning, Split said with a smile, then sat down opposite Hugo with a folder. After you finish eating, we'll go together to visit the Earth's core furnace that has already been put into production. So, after eating, Hugo and Split used the subdimension as a springboard to meet up with the shipgirls who had already started working at the furnace. Hugo had previously imagined what this so-called Earth's core furnace would look like, with the most frequent image being a river of magma made up of various molten metals or something, with dozens or hundreds of machines for forging on both banks of the river. But when he came out of the space gate of the subdimension, he realized that his imagination was completely different from reality. Because on the other side of the space gate was actually a very modern-looking hall. Welcome, Comrade Commander. Seeing Hugo come out, several ship girls led by the Soviet Union all raised their right hands and saluted Hugo. Welcome to visit our metal smelting center. Thank you for your hard work. Hugo, wearing a white military uniform, also raised his right hand and returned a salute. Then he followed these ship girls to visit this core industry. This is a very modern underground base. The walls and floors use a large number of materials similar to plastic, metal, and even glass. Lights cast a soft glow from behind these materials. However, there are not many people in the base. Apart from Hugo and the ship girls, only some construct creatures like robots are going back and forth in the corridors of the base, as if transporting something. These are very simple robots, and they can only do some of the simplest tasks such as carrying, cleaning, and inspecting. Seeing Hugo observing the surrounding robots with curious eyes, the Soviet Union introduced them with pride. These robots were jointly designed and manufactured by Massachusetts and Salem, combining the technology of ordinary people with magic. They can greatly alleviate our current manpower shortage. Speaking of this, the Soviet Union explained the reason. It turned out that after making the first batch of fairy silver, the shipgirls found that this metal was far superior in all aspects to the base metals originally used in their ship equipment. In this way, the nature of fairy silver suddenly changed for them. From a simple commodity, it became an item that shipgirls could use to improve their abilities. Now, except for 1/10 of the fairy silver produced, which is used for the production of various materials, the remaining 90% is all used to replace the metal of everyone's ship equipment. The Soviet Union explained to Hugo seriously, this level of improvement is far more powerful than we previously imagined. To give the simplest example, in many places, just a thin layer of fairy silver plating can increase some aspects of our abilities by 20% to 30%. That's why you applied to me for fairy silver before, right? Hugo nodded and said, you did the right thing. After all, compared to all industries, you are the most important. Also, is there enough fairy silver now? If not, I think we can stop the production of flying brooms and a series of magic, and concentrate all the supplies to you. Thank you, Comrade Commander. but the current output of fairy silver is already sufficient for us. The Soviet Union smiled and said, "We have a complete plan in this regard, so we can just proceed step by step." That's good, that's good. Remember, this type of thing will be given priority to you in the future, and other needs can be put on hold until you have finished using it before considering other aspects. After hearing what the Soviet Union said, Hugo nodded with satisfaction and continued walking forward along the corridor. A few minutes later, he felt the surrounding temperature begin to rise, and then a huge hall like a football field appeared in front of him. In the center of the hall, a series of machines almost filled the entire hall, emitting a roar like a giant beast. A large number of robots with different shapes and functions were busy going back and forth around the machines. These machines look very similar to the machines in the ordinary human world, but if you look closely, you will find that the outer walls of the machines are covered with dense and star-like shining magic runes. This is the Earth's core furnace after our improvement. Because the surrounding environment was a bit noisy, the Soviet Union spoke to Hugo through the Admiral network. Compared to the fairy's original Earth's core furnace, this new Earth's core furnace has a larger volume, higher efficiency, and a very high degree of automation. It can be said to completely crush the fairy's products. Unlike those conservative wizards in the magical world, the shipgirls have a very high degree of acceptance of ordinary human products. So they designed and built this new type of Earth's core furnace that combines magic and technology according to the current shipment volume of fairy silver in the wizarding world and the information left over from the wizard party. The shipgirls can be sure that the efficiency of the Earth's core furnace currently mastered by those fairies is almost only half of their furnace in the beginning. The shipgirls thought they had miscalculated, because they couldn't believe that their simple improvements could achieve such good results. But later they discovered the mystery. If we were to talk about the reason, we could probably write a 10,000-word paper, but if we simplify it, it can be described in one sentence. The Soviet Union said with a smile on her face, "The fairies have gone through thousands of years from the invention of the Earth's core furnace to the present, but their production is stuck at the level of manual workshop production due to the population problem in the magical world, while we have adopted industrialized production." Chapter 277 Industrialization of Shipgirls. Industrialization is not a simple matter. At least in a magical world with a small population but explosive individual production capabilities, it's difficult to foster a demand for industrialization. This kind of thing can't be learned just by looking at it. Therefore, even if the elves can imitate the modern finance industry of the ordinary human world, they still can't handle the content related to industrialization and mass production. The situation of the shipgirls is the opposite. As their prototypes, those warships were all the highest embodiment of industrialization in their respective countries. Therefore, they have a certain love for industry in their bones. So, after thoroughly understanding the technology of this geothermal furnace, the shipgirls added a lot of industrialization features when manufacturing their own magic furnaces. "That's why we are more efficient," said the Savitsky Soyuz, tilting her head slightly with a proud expression. "Compared to the Renaissance-style workshops of the other side, we are much stronger here. For a simple example, compared to the elves' reliance on manual experience, the production of this furnace is obviously much simpler. As long as you operate according to the rules and regulations, you don't need a master craftsman to watch over you. Of course, because of magic, the shipgirls' industrialized modern factories also have a defect. Mass production can only produce products of medium to high quality. It is difficult to produce high-quality products like the elves, but this defect is not irreparable. At least the Intrepid and her sisters can produce high-quality elf silver in small batches to meet everyone's high-end needs. These are some of the broom parts we produce." After visiting the core furnace, the Savitsky Soyuz led Hugo and the others to a factory next door. Unlike the previous smelting workshop, this is a mechanical processing workshop. Under the control of magic cores, a dozen magic construct-driven machines turn the newly produced metal ingots into parts. The powerful functions of our brooms are achieved by these structures made of elf silver or plated with elf silver. Walking to the end of the assembly line, the Savitsky Soyuz picked up an alchemical part plated with elf silver and said, "Moreover, as we use the geothermal furnace, we are gradually summarizing the relevant rules and trying to extend the technology of smelting elf silver to other magical metals. This experiment has consumed a lot of our profits, because many breakthroughs in materials science need to be based on repeated trial and error. Fortunately, we made a breakthrough 3 days ago." As she spoke, the Savitsky Soyuz led Hugo and the others along a passage to the outside, and soon came to the side of a large door. When the door opened, a slightly chaotic scene appeared in front of Hugo. What appeared before him was a huge underground space. A large number of robots were expanding the base under the command of Sverdlov, and if you extend your line of sight to the distance, you can see that this base is built in a series of natural underground spaces, a standard underground base. "What's over there?" Hugo asked curiously, pointing to the darkness not far from the base where the lights couldn't reach. With the afterglow of a little light, Hugo found that there seemed to be a forest growing there, mushrooms, mushrooms, and more mushrooms. The Savitsky snapped her fingers and directed a searchlight to sweep towards the shadow. As the bright light shone on the shadow, Hugo finally saw what the shadow was. This is a jungle composed of various fungi and lichens, with countless mushrooms and lichens of different sizes and colors covering every part from the ground to the top of the cave. In addition to these inanimate creatures, there are also some insects and even reptiles that have adapted to the local life and live in the mushroom jungle. For example, Hugo's enhanced vision saw a python as thick as a human arm coiled around a stone pillar covered with lichen. This place has its own ecosystem. We only initially determined that there was no danger there, so we plan to investigate that forest after the next round of construction is over to see if there is anything useful. Very good, Hugo nodded with satisfaction, then pointed to the construction site and asked, "What is this construction site building?" "We plan to build a factory for smelting and processing magical bronze." The Savitsky pointed to the construction site and said, "This magical bronze is also known as mountain copper or orichalcum, and is the first magical metal created by humans. 3 days ago, we finally figured out the industrialized production method of magical bronze, so we plan to build a new workshop to realize the industrialized production of this magical metal. Compared with elf silver, magical bronze is not as versatile, and its data is much worse in many aspects. But the advantage is that the output is larger and the cost is lower, which is more conducive to the mass production of many items." "That sounds good indeed," Hugo nodded. At this moment, a space door opened in front of a warehouse not far away, and then Quincy walked out of the space door carrying a large bag. "Quincy," seeing Hugo, Quincy immediately raised her hand and greeted him. "Ah, it's Quincy." Looking at Quincy, whose mouth was bulging as if she was eating something, Hugo walked up to greet her, then looked at the suitcase Quincy was pulling from the badge on the suitcase. It can be seen that this is a Hermione student suitcase, which has been cast with a space expansion charm. After all, the magic departments of various countries now have strict control over the space expansion charm. Unless you take a certain risk to manufacture similar magic props yourself, the only legal channel is to buy some second-hand suitcases that have been eliminated by various schools in order to avoid unnecessary attention from others. The ship girls naturally chose this path. And Quincy's current task is to use the purchased second-hand space equipment to transport some supplies. A new batch of broom handles has arrived. After Quincy called out kun to the Savitsky a few times, the Savitsky nodded subconsciously, and then said to Hugo, "They will be repaired, polished, and assembled with metal parts here, and finally sent back to the United States for final assembly." After listening to the Savitsky explanation, Hugo realized that these shipgirls had been following the path of international large-scale division of labor and production from the beginning. In order to achieve the highest production efficiency and the lowest cost, wizards have their own special advantages in this regard. After waving his hand to signal Quincy to enter the base, the Savitsky explained to Hugo, "For ordinary people, the biggest problem with international mass production is the time and cost required for transportation, but in this respect, wizards have unparalleled special advantages, whether it is the international flow network, long-distance apparition using islands, or containers with space expansion charms. They can all compress the transportation cost of various items to a very low level, and this method is also conducive to confidentiality." Enterprise continued. "You know, this production definitely can't rely on us alone, so we naturally have a lot of recruited wizard workers, although we have the ability and means to ensure that these wizards will not leak our secrets. Compared to our special abilities, it is most important to use a system to avoid that kind of leakage event from happening." Chapter 278 New Equipment, Part 1. Hugo was very satisfied with the secret industrial center built by the shipgirls, because whether it was war or peace, manufacturing was an indispensable part. The output of our current base has actually exceeded normal demand, but our shipments are not large, because we still have a large project that requires a large amount of this type of magic metal. After visiting the construction site, the Soviet Union opened a secret door on the wall, and then led everyone deeper underground, while explaining, "In addition to strengthening ship equipment, we also need these metals to manufacture various magic machine tools and some war constructs. To prepare for future expansion of production and possible wars, I thought your machine tools were modified from ordinary machine tools bought from outside. Hearing Enterprise say this, Hugo also realized the unusual nature of those machine tools. At first, we did think about buying machine tools for modification, but later we realized that modifying machine tools was not easy to use under different needs, so we chose to design and manufacture them ourselves, and finally came up with this batch of machine tools suitable for wizards to use. Speaking of this, a look of pride appeared on the Soviet Union's face. It is not so strange that the ship girls can design machine tools. After all, their main bodies have extremely complex mechanical structures, so they naturally have a full understanding of mechanical knowledge, not to mention that there are existences like Indomitable or Salem among them who are proficient in magic, so naturally they can combine a lot of knowledge in a very short time to create this series of machines specially prepared for the magic world. We're here. After walking down the slope for about 50 or 60 meters, they came to a huge iron gate. Then the Soviet Union took out a magic wand and gently tapped it on several patterns on the iron gate. Soon, the iron gate slowly retracted to both sides, revealing a huge space inside. Terracotta Army. When the lights in the space came on, Hugo was surprised to find that he was standing on a platform, and below the platform was a huge pit, with multiple neat arrays of statues standing below this platform. To be precise, this is imitating the guard statues of Hogwarts. The Soviet Union pointed to the stone carvings below and said, and some are experimental products pursuing low cost and rapid production. Experimental products. Hugo looked at the stone carvings below with a puzzled expression, because he felt that these humanoid sculptures that looked like heavy armored warriors were no different from the sculptures at Hogwarts. Yes, these are just experimental products, Enterprise said, pressing a button next to her. Soon, a sculpture walked up a staircase. When the sculpture got closer, Hugo realized that the sculpture looked much rougher than those in the castle, and at the same time, it always felt a little more clumsy. Wait, can magic statues be made of cement? After stepping forward and carefully observing it, Hugo realized that the material used for this statue is not stone at all, but cement. To be precise, these statues are made of reinforced concrete. Under our best efforts to reduce costs, its shelf life is only 3 to 5 years, the Soviet Union said, looking at the statue. I remember that those stone carvings at Hogwarts have lasted for at least 1,000 years. After hearing the Soviet Union say this, a helpless expression appeared on Hugo's face, but making such a stone carving requires a lot of materials and time. Enterprise stepped forward and touched the statue, saying, even if we try our best to produce that kind of statue, we can only make 20 or 30 a year at most. Hogwarts, as an old magic school, has its own advantages. At least after 1,000 years, this school has accumulated powerful strength. For example, the overall defense system of the school is like this. According to Enterprise's investigation, the statues and armors at Hogwarts, which are important parts of the defense, were accumulated little by little over the long years after the school was established. This is why the armor styles at Hogwarts vary greatly, from the oldest Viking chainmail to the Renaissance plate armor. Hugo and the ship girls obviously cannot have such a strong foundation as a 1,000-year-old school, so in this regard, they can only solve the problem through alternative ways. If this kind of reinforced concrete statue is produced with all its strength, the annual output can exceed 6,000. The Soviet Union stood proudly next to the cement statue and said, in terms of quality, this kind of statue is certainly not as good as the fine products produced by Hogwarts. Even an ordinary person can defeat these statues in a one-on-one battle if they find the right tools, but there is no doubt that quantity is also a kind of quality. If a large-scale war really breaks out in the wizarding world, these statues will have an unprecedented effect. Obviously, these statues should have been produced under the guidance of the Soviet ship girls. For them, flooding the enemy with a massive amount of technical weapons is a very useful tactic. Of course, the ship girls are not simply imitating those sculptures at Hogwarts. For example, the number of humanoid sculptures below is less than 1/5, and more are sculptures that look like abstract animals. For example, among the large sculptures below, more than half are a kind of small quadruped sculptures that look like dogs, but have only one body and 4 legs, and 4 crystal beads inlaid above the 4 legs for detection. This is a special sculpture that we invented after being inspired, and it is also the one we are most optimistic about in the sculpture selection, and can perfectly complete various cannon fodder tasks. While introducing, the Soviet Union beckoned such a sculpture to run up. and then took out a flat round box the size of a human face from the ship equipment space and installed it on the back of the sculpture. Considering that this type of sculpture is basically of little use in the Wizarding War, we simply use them as vehicles and as mobile projectile launchers. These weapons contain 12 crossbow bolts, which are launched through a one-time rune, the Soviet Union said, taking out another similar disc from the ship equipment space, then opened the lid and took out a crossbow bolt to explain to Hugo. Although these arrowheads plated with a layer of magic bronze and containing magic potions can have an effect on wizards, to be honest, the effect will not be very good in war. It may take multiple shots to knock open the protective layer on wizards or those magical creatures. The only experimental product with powerful lethality is the crossbow bolt we made with a series of precious materials such as goblin silver, dragon scales, and dragon blood, which can basically cause fatal damage to wizards of the Auror level. But that thing is completely unsuitable for war, because each one needs a top magic expert like Indomitable or Salem to spend 1 to 2 days to manufacture, Enterprise added from the side. What's worse is that the cost of such a crossbow bolt is terribly high, and it is also difficult to ensure a sufficient supply of raw materials. So it can only be used for small-scale beheading operations, not for war. Chapter 279 New Equipment, Part 2. Besides that, we've also set a magical explosive on this weaponized disc. After introducing the crossbow bolts within the disc, Soviet opened the box at the disc's core. The explosive effect is equivalent to an RGD-5 hand grenade because the grenade casing is mixed with a small amount of magical metal and soaked in magical potion. It disrupts the magic defense of magical creatures and wizards themselves. In other words, considering the cost, the magic contained in this thing is minimal. After neutralizing the target's magic, it's likely that only a small amount of kinetic energy will remain to cause physical damage to the enemy. Specifically, how much is this small amount of kinetic energy? Hugo immediately asked after hearing Soviet's explanation, because his standards differed from those of the ship girls in this regard, equivalent to an arrow fired from a 200-pound pocket crossbow, nothing more. Speaking of this, Soviet seemed somewhat dissatisfied because this level of pocket crossbow is only suitable for close-range assassination at best. In other words, it will only be effective with a close-range explosion. Enterprise also shook her head. For wizards, this kind of damage is simply too small. This is enough even if wizards have various magical potions and spells that can easily heal this kind of physical damage. Being hit by this during a fight is not something a normal person can withstand. After hearing the ship girl's words, Hugo immediately stated that the power of this magic bomb was just right and didn't need to be increased further. After all, this thing is just an auxiliary weapon, and it's enough if it can be mass-produced cheaply and cause a certain degree of harassment to the enemy. After inspecting the small sculptures, Hugo continued his tour inside the underground base. Apart from the humanoid and canine sculptures that occupied the majority, the remaining sculptures were produced in small quantities, but each had its own characteristics. For example, giant statues that looked like giants, or some special purpose statues that could fly or move in water. However, according to Soviet's explanation, after testing, they realized that these special statues were more suitable when made in the traditional way, otherwise the cost-effectiveness would be too low. After visiting these statues, Hugo arrived at the last stop of his trip, an alchemy workshop located at the bottom of the large pit under heavy protection. The projects we are currently researching are temporarily based on semi-finished projects left by a few Wizangamut members back then. Enterprise took over the explanation at this time and said, because these projects are relatively easy to research, they can be used for practice. That's right. Research does require gradual progress. Hugo nodded and then looked at the boxes around him and asked, have you made any progress in your research during this time? We have successfully created a wand sheath that corresponds to the wand, Soviet said, taking a box from the shelf, placing it on the table, and opening it. Inside the box were 2 rings, one large and one small. The large ring was just an ordinary ring, and next to it was a silver ring that could barely fit on the tip of a little finger. What is this for? Hugo picked up the silver ring in the box with some confusion compared to the self-explanatory plain silver ring. He didn't quite understand what the silver ring next to it was for. This is something that allows the wand to return after it leaves the hand. Soviet took out the contents and said, when using it, wear the plain silver ring on your body, and the silver ring is fastened on the wand. Soon, Hugo installed this set of equipment on his wand and tried it out. The result was that the whole set was very easy to use no matter where he threw the wand. As long as he waved his hand, the wand would return to the hand with the ring on it. For wizards, This is a very meaningful magical tool because most of the wizard's abilities are concentrated on their wand. If they don't have a wand, they are not much stronger than ordinary people. This kind of thing will be on the market for Christmas. Seeing Hugo nod in satisfaction, Soviet introduced from the side. I suggest that you, Comrade Commander, can take a batch as gifts for everyone. This is indeed a good gift. After a brief inquiry, he learned that the cost of this thing was less than 1 galleon, but the selling price was 2 galleons and 7 sickles. Hugo decided that this would be the gift for most of his friends this year. In addition to this wand auxiliary tool, Soviet and the others have also successfully researched a magic accumulating javelin when held in the hand and charged for 2 seconds before launch. Each strike is equivalent to a fully launched stupefy spell from an aura. However, in order to avoid magical interference between different magical forces, the javelin only has alchemical structures related to explosions, and throwing it requires a purely physical method. This thing was originally used by goblins for giants after all, a race that can launch multiple rebellions and not be completely exterminated, but instead control the wizarding world's financial industry, will always have some trump cards up their sleeves, Soviet said, taking a javelin named Thunder from the cabinet, and then explained to Hugo about this weapon that was carelessly stuffed in the corner by the Wizengamot back then. But this thing is very useful to us, and can be used to equip various puppets and ourselves, especially when attacking targets behind cover. This weapon can make up for the shortcomings of most offensive spells. The wand recall device and the magic accumulating javelin are 2 items that the shipgirls have restored from that pile of old papers during this period recently. After gaining new knowledge one after another, everyone had to suspend this work and focus their attention on learning new knowledge, so this work has also stalled. We have basically categorized and sorted out the newly acquired knowledge recently, so next we can continue this restoration work and use our newly acquired knowledge, Soviet introduced while visiting a series of semi-finished products in the back. If there are no accidents, by this summer, our production in this area will enter a boom, and this will just be in time for the Quidditch World Cup. If that's the case, that would be great. By the way, speaking of the World Cup, does any national team use our Sky Side 3 broom? Hugo asked, looking at Soviet. Only 5 or 6 teams temporarily, and they are basically rookies. For example, the Chinese Quidditch team, which was only formed in recent years, and the Irish Quidditch team, which is considered this year's dark horse, the Irish Quidditch team. That's good. Thinking of this championship team and the original text, Hugo nodded with satisfaction. After all, the World Cup qualifiers have already begun, and the Irish team is considered by many to be this year's dark horse. After finishing the tour, they came to the office and recreation area located in the center of the base. Because this base is only open to Hugo and his shipgirls, there is plenty of space. For example, this core office area not only has common offices, cafeterias, and rest areas, but also has game rooms, stadiums, and even swimming pools. After everyone sat down together in the office, they began to talk about other things. For example, the situation here after the end of the war. Kirov and Stalingrad now control the magic world and the ordinary human world of this emerging country respectively. And this country will become an important cornerstone for us in this world in the future. After everyone was seated, Split immediately turned on the projector and reported. Chapter 280, Rebuilding the Country. When peace descends upon a region, the people there sometimes become busier rather than relaxed. After all, even if the war ends, post-war reconstruction and a series of other tasks still require a large amount of manpower and resources compared to the situation during the war. The current work is more cumbersome and challenging. Faced with people who have lost their loved ones in ruins, restoring the wounds of this land is not an easy task. Even though the area here is small and the population is small, the complexity of the matter far exceeds everyone's expectations. Split side. If we didn't have the Admiral network, which allows us to communicate at any time, and if everyone couldn't work around the clock, we probably wouldn't be able to survive. That's just because your demands are too high, Hugo said. Knowing some of the things through the Admiral network. Seriously, if you were humans, you might really end up being exhausted to death like Zhuge Liang, but we are not humans, so we have enough capital to make this world, or at least a part of the world, a better place, Split said with a smile. We come from the good side of humanity, so in many ways we are close to those human idealists. But unlike humans, we have enough power to try to realize our dreams. That's right, you do have a truth that humans don't have to convince people. Hugo nodded after looking at these shipgirls in front of him. At least those big pipes exceeding 100 millimeters are definitely not something normal humans can possess. In short, the current situation is generally very good. At least, while sorting out internal affairs, We can still spare some manpower to enter Albania to search for Voldemort. However, in order to avoid being noticed in advance by Voldemort that someone is specifically targeting him, except for the ship girls themselves, the rest are just hiring those free wizards to find ways to search for various abnormal traces. The best news we have now is from Kirov. She hired a group of free wizards through the black market who found traces of Nagini. If there are no accidents, we will most likely be able to catch her, Split said finally. Didn't you find that noseless guy? Hugo asked curiously, because in his impression, Voldemort was with Nagini when he was in Albania. At least the mercenaries didn't find any abnormalities. Split shook his head with a solemn expression. St. George has gone south, and she will make the final confirmation before Christmas. Then I can only hope that everything goes smoothly, Hugo nodded and said. But even if you can't find that noseless guy, it doesn't matter. You can directly bring that snake back. At least I think Nagini is already very unlucky. If Voldemort makes her a Horcrux again, she will be even more unlucky. If we have the ability, it is better to help her out. After the inspection, Hugo stayed in the Balkans for a full 3 days. In addition to inspecting the underground base of the ship girls, he also visited the entire country where the war had ceased. I have to say that these ship girls have indeed lived up to the heritage of their names. Under their efforts, although this place is full of ruins, at least hope has appeared on people's faces for this region. Hope is very important. It can even be said to be as important as various materials. Because with hope, this region will have a future to speak of. The situation is better than expected. Split, as the highest military commander here, dressed himself up simply and walked with Hugo on the streets of Sarajevo. Where did you see that from? Hugo asked with some incomprehension. In his eyes, this city under reconstruction really couldn't be said to have anything that could be called better than expected, although, because of the intervention of the ship girls, the siege war faced by the city was not as long and cruel as Hugo's previous life. The siege war that lasted for more than a year still brought heavy damage to this city. To give a simplest example, you can see many people with obvious external injuries on the street, and most of the houses on both sides of the street show a certain degree of damage. As a result, most of the people on both sides of the street are busy rebuilding these buildings. Because there are more than 20% more people working on the streets than I imagined, Split quickly observed the changes on the streets and made a conclusion based on the information he had checked before. If we combine the records from the Customs and Border Defense, we can confirm that most of the people who previously went to Italy, Austria and other countries to take refuge are returning, which also shows that they are full of confidence in this land and its people. You're right, being poor and blank is not terrible. What's terrible is losing confidence. Hugo nodded in agreement. I believe this land will be rejuvenated again. On the third day of arriving in the Balkans, Hugo said goodbye to Stalingrad and the Soviet Union, and then returned to France and switched identities with de Grasse again. The following ski trip was indeed very interesting. Although Hugo had not received any training in this area before, he quickly learned to ski with his strong physical fitness. Of course, during this period, Voinamainen helped him a lot. This ship girl from Finland remotely taught him through the Admiral network how to ski and how to move easily on the snow. In short, this Christmas holiday was a very good holiday for Hugo. At least he could take this opportunity to relax and arrange a series of situations related to the transformation of the home port from war to peace. Indeed, the ship girls are fully capable of handling the current situation independently, but they are still habitually hoping that Hugo, the Admiral, can make his own decisions soon. It was Christmas. When they got out of bed that day, they found a large pile of Christmas gifts placed on the carpet in front of the bed. In this regard, Hugo admires the owls in the wizarding world very much. At least he has never figured out how these owls bring these things into a closed room. After counting, he found that in addition to the various gifts from the ship girls, some of these gifts also came from classmates and those people he met during the alchemy competition last time. Dragon claw powder, it's a good thing that you can't even buy. Hugo happily took out a small bottle of powder from a box. Although direct consumption destroys the brain, it has a very wide range of applications in alchemy. Are you going to make Bath's brain-boosting potion? Hermione curiously leaned over and said. I heard that thing has a very good refreshing effect and basically has no side effects. If there are any shortcomings, it is that the production is too complicated and the price is too expensive, so there are almost no genuine products on the market. If you buy fake medicine, it will lightly make your brain confused for a few hours, and severely it will directly turn you into a vegetable. Don't worry, I met a few wizards last time who are very good at making potions, Hugo said, putting away the bottle. So if I really want to drink it, I will definitely ask someone to check it after it's made before drinking it. Chapter 281 Gift. This is, as Hugo was examining the Christmas presents one by one, Hermione suddenly picked out a gold bracelet inlaid with gemstones from a very pretty silver box. Hugo recognized at a glance that this was a protective bracelet made by the ship girls using branches and leaves from the golden oak tree, as well as scales from the red and white twin dragons. So he asked, knowing full well, "Is this gold?" "Oh, probably not." After a quick examination, Hermione relaxed and said. After all, she was just a teenage girl, so she would naturally be wary when seeing such an expensive gift. The whole thing feels very light, but it also feels a bit like metal. So I think it might be made by plating a lighter metal like aluminum with gold. As for the gemstones on it, they don't feel like stones, but rather like plastic. I've seen this kind of jewelry in Hogsmeade 8 before, and they said it was made artificially from some kind of resin. Clearly, humans have an innate love for various precious metals and jewels, so Hermione had thoroughly explored the wizard's jewelry when she visited Hogsmeade 8 before, and thus had some understanding of the wizard's specialties. This was sent by Veneto, and it is indeed a nice Christmas present. After glancing at the sender on the wrapping paper, Hermione nodded and put the bracelet on her wrist. It must be said that after acquiring a large amount of information about alchemy and Ravenclaw's diadem, the shipgirls had mastered powerful alchemical techniques. Therefore, even with a large number of alchemical effects, this protective bracelet had almost no magical leakage as a result. Hermione didn't realize the preciousness of this bracelet at all, and simply wore it on her wrist as a pretty little ornament with wizarding characteristics. In addition to Veneto, Firefly also gave Hermione a sharp, sheathed dagger. According to the attached note, this dagger had multiple enchantments and could easily cut through most things. Why do I feel like you have so many more Christmas presents this year than in previous years? Hermione suddenly looked up and said as they were both nearly done unwrapping their gifts. Compared to the gifts Hugo received in previous years, this year's pile of gifts was visibly much larger, even several times larger just in terms of volume. I think it might be related to me getting second place in the alchemy competition last time, Hugo said, stuffing the last box of powdered mandrake root into his space-expanded trunk. Hugo wasn't lying to Hermione on this point, because after the alchemy competition during the summer vacation, he, as the youngest participant, had achieved a good result of second place, and was naturally valued by many people. Therefore, after the competition, he received a large number of letters of exchange, and even several famous alchemists expressed their willingness to take him as a disciple. In this situation, Hugo naturally maintained contact with many alchemists and their students. So, they would naturally exchange gifts at Christmas. Of course, the gifts from the alchemists were just for outward reputation. The real bulk of the gifts came from the shipgirls, who had finally found an opportunity to give things to Hugo while concealing their identities. It's a good thing we sent a return gift with every present, otherwise it would be too rude. After putting away all the gifts, Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and said, I just don't know if the others will like the gifts we sent. I can't believe it. As Hugo was talking to his sister, Harry, far away at Hogwarts, unwrapped a beautiful flying broomstick from a long package. This broom was his old Nimbus 2000, which had been broken into several pieces by the attack of the giant squid in the Black Lake. However, after Hugo repaired it, at least a broom had been restored in appearance. However, unlike the original broom, in order to repair the fatal wounds on this flying broomstick, Hugo used a lot of precious metals to reconnect the damaged alchemical structures so that the internal structure of the broom could be restored at the same time. With the help of the shipgirls, the appearance of these newly connected alchemical structures was redesigned, and bas-reliefs were added to match the exposed metal wires and metal pieces, giving the entire broom a gorgeous Rococo style. It seems that Hugo's level in alchemy is more powerful than we thought. No wonder my two brothers have been making something with him all the time, Ron also exclaimed in surprise as he looked at a broomstick floating in the air. After this modification, this broom has become a work of art. If you take it to Diagon Alley to sell, someone would definitely be willing to pay the price of a new Nimbus 2000 to buy this broom. That way, your new broom, I will never sell this broomstick. After all, this is my first broomstick, and it's also a gift from a friend. After hearing Ron's suggestion, Harry shook his head vigorously and said, As for the broom, I'll always find a way. At the same time, Enterprise and Hogsmeade brought Sirius, who had turned into a dog, to the jungle on the outskirts of the town, and then Sirius turned back into a human. I want to buy my godson a broomstick. The first thing Sirius said to Enterprise after turning into a human was about Harry. His old broomstick is broken, and the first game for the Gryffindor team is after Christmas. Calm down, Black. Looking at Black, who was much better than before but still had some mental problems, Enterprise stared at him intently. How are you going to buy Harry a broomstick? Don't forget that you are still wanted. I can completely buy Harry a broomstick through a Gringotts transfer, Sirius said with a nonchalant expression. For high-level clients of Gringotts Bank, the goblins will take the money as long as they see the mark, and they will also strictly maintain the client's confidentiality. This confidentiality procedure is very strict. Even the Ministry of Magic cannot trace the economic flow of high-level clients. So no one will know that the new broomstick was given to Harry by me. And then, what name are you going to use to give it to Harry? Enterprise asked with a helpless expression. Don't forget that you are still suspected of wanting to kill Harry, and I even think you might tamper with this broomstick to carry out a murder. Damn it. Because of this period of recuperation, Sirius's condition had improved somewhat. So after being told this by Enterprise, he immediately reacted, if I anonymously, no, I can't do that. Anonymously, it would look more like something a dark wizard would do, but borrowing someone else's name won't work either. Sirius paced around in place while muttering to himself, becoming more and more anxious. If that doesn't work, I have a plan here. Enterprise also knew that Sirius had been impulsive all his life. So to prevent him from making any bad moves, Enterprise quickly thought of a solution. What plan? Hearing Enterprise say this, Sirius immediately stopped. Then he looked at Enterprise expectantly with a pleading expression. After all, now he could only send gifts to his beloved godson through Enterprise. Chapter 282 School starts. I happen to know the cord designer who is currently producing the Daydream series of brooms, so you can write me an IOU, and then I'll have them find a way to send Harry a Daydream 3 broom under some pretext. Seeing Sirius's anxious expression, Enterprise didn't beat around the bush but directly stated her plan. Of course, this is limited to the Daydream 3 broom because I only know people in this company, so I can do something in this regard. Okay, it's settled then. As soon as Enterprise finished speaking, Sirius nodded in agreement. After all, although he had been staying in the hotel kitchen for a while and hadn't seen many people, he had been listening to the radio while Zufang was cooking, so Sirius naturally knew what kind of broom the Daydream 3 was for him. Buying his godson the best broom as an apology for not being able to take care of him for so many years was the most important thing. As for the specific brand of the broom, he didn't care much. By the way, have you caught that bastard Peter yet? After discussing matters related to his godson, Sirius immediately asked about the rat he cared about most. Not yet. Enterprise shook her head and then glared at Sirius with an angry expression, saying, it's all because you went to the school last time, which made him aware of your existence and hide. Now it's not so easy to catch that guy. Don't forget, Hogwarts is a very large castle with a lot of temporarily abandoned rooms, corridors, and pipes hidden inside the building. These places are not easy to pass through for humans or even your dog form, but for a rat, he can completely hide somewhere by using these passages. Sorry, I was indeed impulsive last time. Sirius lowered his head and mumbled apologetically after hearing Enterprise's long speech since being discovered by Enterprise and temporarily placed under house arrest in that restaurant. He had gained safe accommodation and sufficient food, and he also had the opportunity to calm down and think about things properly as a Slytherin pure-blood wizard. Sirius still had some basic thinking skills, so as he thought. He quickly realized that what he had done before was too impulsive. It's good that you can realize that you were impulsive last time. Seeing Sirius willing to apologize, Enterprise didn't plan to use this opportunity to rebuke Sirius again. So, next you should still stay quietly in that restaurant and wait for me to catch Peter and let him confront you. Don't take it upon yourself to make things that were originally not a problem become a problem. Hugo naturally knew about this transaction between Enterprise and Sirius through the Admiral network. In his opinion, this transaction was also beneficial to him after all. The story derived from the firebolt in the original text was a significant plot, so after making large-scale changes to this story, he could obviously obtain a lot of destiny points to supplement the points consumed by summoning magic-type shipgirls for Hugo. The rest of the vacation was very comfortable because this feeling of traveling with the whole family in a tourist town did give people a sense of happiness, and when he returned to Hogwarts, this good mood continued smoothly because Hogwarts gave him the feeling of another home just as they were about to have breakfast on the first day of school. Hugo and the others met Harry and Ron at the entrance of the Great Hall. They had come to express their gratitude to Hugo. Thank you so much for your gift. Seeing Hugo coming down the stairs, Harry and Ron immediately stepped forward to express their thanks. Especially the Nimbus 2000. The restoration is better than I imagined. It's good that you're satisfied, Hugo replied with a smile. When I was repairing it, I was always worried that you would be dissatisfied with my modifications. I'm glad you like my craftsmanship, repairing brooms? It seems we may have more things to ask you for in the future. Just as Hugo was talking to Harry and Ron, a voice came from the side. Hugo turned his head and found the Weasley twins coming down the stairs shoulder to shoulder, with a smile on their faces similar to that of a successful prank. What have you guys been up to lately? Hearing the twins say this, Hugo immediately asked because he knew that the Weasley brothers liked to joke, but they were definitely not the kind of people who spoke carelessly. We've been up to something interesting, Fred said after thinking for a moment. But we've only thought of the principle and can't make a finished product yet. If it's convenient for you, at least I'm free recently. You can send me an holiday in advance, Hugo assured the Weasley brothers. Although the Weasley twins' academic level was relatively poor, judging from their previous study time and level, they would most likely fail this year's OWL exams, but this didn't prevent them from constantly making various interesting joke products. Therefore, for Hugo, establishing a cooperative relationship with the Weasley twins by providing technical support was naturally a very valuable long-term investment. Every morning at mealtime, owls would bring mail to everyone. Especially on the first day after the Christmas holiday, many parents would send over the things their children had left behind. It was at this time that 6 owls brought a slender package and dropped it in front of him, just like when he was in first grade, and then another owl dropped a letter on the package. Oh my god. When did you get a new broom? Seeing the wrapping paper on the broom, Ron suddenly became excited because the wrapping paper on this long package had a golden anchor logo with wings on it. This logo had only appeared a few months ago with a Daydream 3 broom given to Veneto, but because of the broom's overwhelming advantage over the old brooms, it quickly gained a high reputation at Hogwarts. Sure enough, after unwrapping the wrapping paper, what was revealed was a silver inlaid mahogany box, the same as the one Veneto had received at the time. The only difference was that there was no trial version label, a prize from the last lottery. Harry, you're so lucky. After looking at the letter that was also dropped, Ron's face showed an excited expression. They only gave away 3 brooms worldwide, and you were able to get one. I really didn't expect Harry to reply to our lottery GG form, but considering that the GG form was mailed over on Hogsmeade Day, it's very likely that he filled out our GG form out of boredom. Enterprise explained to Hugo through the Admiral network why Harry mailed the lottery GG form. After Enterprise received Sirius's request, she contacted Salem and unexpectedly discovered Harry's lottery ticket, so the ship girls' work suddenly became much easier. They only needed to do a simple operation, and they made Harry one of the 3 winners in the world, winning a Daydream 3 broom. Chapter 283 Hunting Acromantula. For Hugo, Harry getting the broomstick added 3 points of destiny to him. Adding the 2 points after New Year's Day, Hugo had now obtained enough destiny points to summon a large ship, and for Harry, it meant that he now had a top-notch new broom after his old one retired, allowing him to continue with the upcoming matches. That day's Care of Magical Creatures class was very interesting because, considering the wet and cold Scottish Highlands in January, Hagrid lit a large fire and put several fire salamanders in it for everyone to get to know these magical creatures. There's been some unusual activity in the Forbidden Forest recently, Hagrid said to Hugo and the others, taking the opportunity while everyone was busy collecting dead branches and leaves to keep the fire going. The Acromantulas inside are disappearing by the dozens. I don't think there's another basilisk in the Forbidden Forest, is there? Hugo replied immediately. The key question is, apart from the Acromantulas, are there any other changes in the Forbidden Forest? Actually, Hagrid had barely asked the question when he knew what had happened, because the Valkyries had told Hugo a while ago that they would enter the Forbidden Forest to hunt Acromantulas for alchemists. Every part of the Acromantula is a treasure. Whether it's their carapace, fangs, venom, spider silk, or eggs, they can all be used as important alchemical materials. So, in addition to capturing some to be artificially raised in the newly acquired subspace and the breeding base in Russia, they also hunted some wild Acromantulas for current needs. The reason for choosing to raise them in Russia rather than other places is simple. The biological invasion caused by Hagrid raising Acromantulas shows how dangerous these creatures are once released into the wild. Fortunately, these animals come from the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia. Scotland is already the northern limit of their survival. Acromantulas simply cannot survive in the wild near the Soviet breeding farms in the northern Ural Mountains, close to the Arctic Circle. So, in this case, the ship girls can safely raise these magical creatures as raw material providers, and even if the Acromantulas escape occasionally due to staff negligence, There is no need to worry about biological invasion problems. Unlike traditional potion masters and alchemists, the ship girls have a general feeling about the venom of the acromentrulus, but they are very interested in their spider silk. According to Indomitable, this spider silk is actually a very good magical textile material, and if enchanted by alchemical means, the woven fabric will have magical conductivity. Moreover, compared to those traditional magical textiles, this spider silk is much more cost-effective, and there are also ways to produce it on a small scale, mass-produced basis. Of course, this matter definitely cannot be told to Hagrid, otherwise Hagrid will definitely be sad. So Hugo can only try to attribute this matter to some kind of acromantula predator in the Forbidden Forest. Fortunately, these ship girls have enough bottom lines, so they are only targeting the acromentrulus as biological invaders. Therefore, everyone else present felt that his guess was the most reasonable. After all, if it were poachers, it would be difficult to explain why there were more valuable things along the way that were not lost at all, only targeting the acromentrulus. Could it be that a dragon passed by here? Hermione said after thinking for a while, looking at some of the photos Hagrid brought. Because the photos showed a lot of scorch marks left in those scenes. Actually, I thought so too, but as far as I know, all the dragons are under the surveillance of wizards from various countries. But now, according to the information I asked around, no breeding farm or reserve has reported any missing dragons. After listening to Hermione's guess, Hagrid shook his head somewhat dejectedly and said, "So I've been patrolling in the Forbidden Forest recently and haven't found any traces related to dragons." It's also very normal that Hagrid can't find the ship girls. After all, as a half-giant, even if he is now allowed to use a wand, his spellcasting level may not be as good as some senior students. When faced with a warning circle deployed by the unicorn using carrier-based aircraft, Hagrid wouldn't even realize the existence of this warning circle, so naturally, there was no way to catch those ship girls. In fact, the ship girls' actions were not completely hidden from outsiders. At least several centaurs had seen them hunting in the forest, but considering that they would only attack the acromentrulus, which are a public nuisance in the Forbidden Forest, and that they could be accepted by the unicorn, the centaurs would pretend that they hadn't noticed anything. When Hagrid asked, "Do you know of any places that sell relatively cost-effective alarms or monitors?" At the end, Hagrid looked at Hugo and asked, "If I patrol alone, there are really too many loopholes." Obviously, the reason why Hagrid said so much today is that he really can't find what he needs on the market, so he hopes to buy something from Hugo. "If possible, I think I can help you make some." Hugo immediately nodded in agreement after hearing Hagrid's request. After all, Hagrid also has a lot of enviable materials in his hands, but you have to give me a cost fee, or materials. After all, the cost of various materials is not cheap, and I really don't have much money to buy materials to make these alarms and monitoring facilities. Don't worry about this. I will give you things according to the rules of you alchemists. As a 60-year-old wizard, Hagrid naturally understands how to deal with people. But I don't have much cash, so a lot can only be offset with materials. The so-called alchemist's rules are very simple. That is, in addition to the labor cost, the customer also needs to provide additional materials or material costs. As for how much more materials are needed, it depends on the items being made. To give a simplest example, if you want to make a legendary alchemical tool like the Philosopher's Stone, then you need at least 100 times the materials. Magical alarm facilities like the ones Hagrid commissioned are the simplest type of alchemical products, so basically, you give 11 sets of raw materials for making 10 items. Because of the Dementor attack before, Hermione added training to summon a corporeal patronus during weekend practice. Just like some ancient records in the wizarding world, Muggle-born wizards, although not large in number, have stronger talent in casting spells than pure-blood or half-blood family wizards. So after Veneto explained the spellcasting essentials, Hermione simply tried 5 or 6 times and made wisps of silver smoke appear on her wand. "Good job, sister," Hugo applauded. At least not many people can make their wands react the first time they cast this complicated spell, but it's still not as good as your corporeal patronus. Looking at the silver octopus floating beside her, Hermione shook her head somewhat dissatisfied. "Be content, my dear sister. Actually, I might not have been as good as you when I first learned it." Hugo shrugged and said, "I've been practicing this spell since I learned it last summer vacation, and it wasn't until now that I was able to cast a corporeal patronus." By the end of the practice, Hermione was already able to summon a ball of silver smoke the size of a basketball. At this rate, she should be able to summon her own corporeal patronus before the end of this semester. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, It means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Discover Peter. Time flew by, and February arrived quickly after January, but the weather remained terrible. Although there were occasional sunny days, the dim sunlight didn't bring much warmth to the land. However, no matter how bad the weather was, the Quidditch team still needed to train, especially the Ravenclaw team, whose training tasks had increased rather than decreased recently compared to before. After all, Harry Potter had the Firebolt, which completely leveled the playing field in terms of equipment with the Ravenclaw team. Considering that Cho Chang had been a substitute since joining the team last year, everyone was not optimistic about the outcome of a one-on-one match between them. Fortunately, the Ravenclaw team was used to matches where the Seeker's advantage wasn't on their side, so everyone's morale wasn't greatly affected, but the intensity of training increased a lot also. Because of this reason, Veneto had to devote a lot of time to participate in training. Although she was only a substitute, Captain Davies believed that using her as a sparring partner would help improve the overall level of the team. This day happened to be Saturday, so after finishing their homework, Hugo and his sister Hermione walked out of the castle, preparing to watch Veneto training on the field. As a result, halfway there, they received a message from Enterprise through the Admiral network. Admiral, I found Peter's location, near Hagrid's vegetable garden, Enterprise reported to Hugo while quickly walking through the corridor. Ever since Peter disappeared, she had been constantly sending out her carrier-based aircraft, transformed into birds, to search the surroundings of the school. After several months, she finally locked onto the opponent's location. Being able to find this rat was indeed mainly due to luck, but prior analysis was also essential. After all, Peter was a rat transformed from a human, and he had been maintaining human thinking. Therefore, he must have had certain choices when choosing a hiding place, rather than being like a real rat, able to hide in any small space. According to the ship girl's analysis, Peter at this stage didn't think he had been completely exposed, so he still hoped to return to the Weasley family after Sirius Black was captured and continue his lurking life. Therefore, he naturally wouldn't leave the school too far. On the other hand, with Peter's timid personality, the opponent would most likely not choose to be too close to the Dementors. Therefore, the probability of him hiding in Hogsmeade was not very high. So, in the search, the ship girls successfully narrowed the search range, focusing on the area centered on Hogwarts Castle, and places with human activity were even more important. And just as the ship girls and Hugo had previously thought, Peter, not knowing that the fact that he was an unregistered animagus had been completely exposed, finally slightly expanded his range of activities. After hiding for several months, especially after the weather had improved in the past few days, Peter, who had been hiding in Hagrid's room, finally decided to leave the room a little distance and take a few turns in the nearby vegetable garden. It must be said that this rat really knew how to choose a place. Compared to the castle itself, where house elves, pet cats, and owls were active, Hagrid's hut, with only Hagrid and a clumsy dog in the room, was obviously much safer even if he wanted to eat something. Hagrid had more food here, and with Hagrid's rough personality, he would basically not notice the small amount of food a rat stole. But what Peter could never have imagined was that those sea eagles that quickly swept across the sky and the birds chirping in the nearby trees were all searching for a rat with many wounds on its body and a missing claw on its front paw. Therefore, he had only been in the pumpkin patch for less than 5 minutes when he was identified and locked onto by Enterprise's carrier-based aircraft that had transformed into sea eagles, and then notified every node on the Admiral network. What are you going to do? The Quidditch pitch is over there. After receiving the signal from the Admiral network, Hugo immediately walked towards Hagrid's hut, and as soon as he left, Hermione immediately noticed something was wrong. I have a feeling that I should go to Hagrid's now, Hugo said seriously to his sister. In the magical world, there is a special advantage, that is, some premonitions can really be used as reasons for some things. So, in the current situation where he couldn't think of a reason, Hugo could only use this excuse that couldn't really be considered an excuse to prevaricate his sister. Then I'll go with you, Hermione said, changing her plans after hearing what Hugo said. After all, compared to her best friend, her brother was obviously more important. Okay, let's go together, Hugo thought for a while and felt that it wouldn't be a big problem for his sister to follow from a security perspective, so he nodded and went to Hagrid's hut with Hermione. The opponent is hiding under a pumpkin. It looks like he's sunbathing. As Hugo walked along the path on the lawn towards Hagrid's hut, Enterprise and Unicorn continue to revise the information about Peter. Unicorn and Firefly are now ambushing in the Forbidden Forest. If Peter flees into the Forbidden Forest, he will be discovered and captured immediately, Enterprise said, rushing out of the castle gate and speaking at the fastest speed. Slow down a little, wait for me. Because Unicorn's carrier-based aircraft just discovered that the rat seems to be wearing a golden necklace around its neck. A golden necklace? Hugo immediately asked after hearing this word. Can you roughly tell what kind of necklace it is? I can't tell the style, because all that can be seen from the sky is a golden chain, Enterprise replied immediately. However, whether it's the appearance or the shape, this necklace looks like it's been around for a while. More importantly, Animagus transformation theoretically allows you to transform with the clothes you're wearing. So the fact that the opponent is now wearing a golden chain seems quite suspicious. Hearing this, Hugo immediately realized that things had changed, so he slowed down and began to wait for the ship girls to meet up with him. Soon, Enterprise caught up from behind. You said you were going to Hagrid's to take a look? Perfect timing. I was also planning to find him for some tea. After saying a few simple words, Enterprise took the Granger siblings to Hagrid's hut together. Just as the group walked to a place more than 10 meters away from the pumpkin patch, Peter moved. Obviously, the opponent had been staring at the road coming from the castle, and would run away immediately if he saw anyone coming. Look, there's a rat wearing a golden chain. Hermione immediately pointed to the pumpkin patch and shouted, and subconsciously chased after it. Obviously, Peter forgot that he now had a golden chain on his body, which was very conspicuous in the sun when he ran. Seeing his sister chase after it, Hugo and Enterprise also followed. At the same time, they each drew their wands and began casting spells at the rat that was running away frantically as one spell after another exploded in front of Peter. Peter had to give up fleeing into the Forbidden Forest and turn to run along the edge of the Forbidden Forest at the same time. Peter also knew the reason why he was being chased from Hermione's shout just now, which made him relax a little. At least he knew that these people behind him were chasing him because of the dazzling chain on his body in the sunlight, and not because they recognized him as Peter. Chapter 285 Time Conversion. However, after only a few seconds of running, Peter realized that not being recognized wasn't entirely a good thing. Many of the spells hitting near him now were incredibly lethal. Obviously, if his pursuers recognized him as Peter, they might try to capture him alive. But if they were just attracted to the gold chain, killing a rat for a gold chain would be perfectly normal for most people. Realizing this, Peter ran even faster, but just a few meters from a thicket, he suddenly tripped. The rat tumbled forward, ensnared in a net of thorny branches, finally caught it. Hermione, seeing the rat trapped, placed her hands on her knees, panting, and walked forward to grab the tightly bound rodent. But just as Hermione's hand touched the gold chain around the rat, a burst of light erupted where they made contact. Sensing danger, Hugo immediately grabbed his sister's hand. The moment he did, a powerful suction pulled from Hermione's hand. He watched as he was completely enveloped in a ball of light accompanied by a sound like an airplane taking off. The light gradually faded, and darkness surrounded them. Hugo felt a weightless sensation, as if he were floating in the clouds, but this peaceful feeling lasted only a few seconds before he felt himself spinning uncontrollably, a force violently tugging at him. At that moment, a strange power surged from Hugo's heart, flowing through his muscles and veins, enveloping both him and Hermione clearly. After numerous enhancements, Hugo had become partially infused with the power of an ancient god, enabling him to unleash enough strength to protect himself and his sister in this situation. Even with this protection, Hugo felt like he had been thrown into a washing machine. Waves of force crashed over him. Despite the ancient god's power, he felt as if his body was being sliced with razor blades. Strangely, when Hugo used the light emanating from the ancient god's shield to look at his body, he was surprised to find that he was unharmed. Hermione beside him looked the same. Through their joined hands, Hugo could feel her trembling violently from the pain, but she didn't have a single scratch, and even her clothes were mostly intact. Fortunately, the process wasn't long. Protected by the ancient god's power, Hugo and Hermione safely ended their journey and once again stood on solid ground. However, the pain was so intense that Hugo stumbled and fell to the ground. An overwhelming sense of fatigue rose from his soul. Even stranger, he found that his clothes were tattered, but not from fire or sharp objects. Instead, they resembled damage caused by long exposure to the elements. Hermione lay on the grass a few meters away, equally still, with no visible injuries. But her soft moans suggested she was in a similar state to Hugo. What just happened? After catching his breath, Hugo asked his sister. Did you touch a portkey or something? I'm not sure, Hermione said, gasping for air. I just grabbed the rat, and then a ball of light suddenly burst out of it. Admiral, what happened? At that moment, a cluster of light particles coalesced near Hugo, forming a luminous figure. Victory, dressed in a black military uniform, stepped out, looking anxious. I don't know, Hugo said, his expression grave as he surveyed the surroundings. Hide me and my sister somewhere. It would be troublesome if someone saw us lying by the roadside like this. No problem. The bushes across the road look good. We can hide there for now. Hearing Hugo's command, Victory nodded and carried Hugo and Hermione towards the hill. Who exactly is this Miss Victory? Hermione asked curiously as she was carried up the hill. From their conversation, she gathered that her brother knew this young woman with long silver hair and purple eyes. Please wait a moment, my sister, Hugo replied, still observing their surroundings. I'll explain everything once we've settled down. Hugo's tension, preventing him from even answering Hermione, stemmed from the fact that the Admiral network was empty. He couldn't contact any ship girls except Victory. I can confirm that everyone is still connected to the Admiral network, but it seems like everyone else is being blocked by a special force, Victory said through the Admiral network. Besides that, we can send messages to the other ship girls, but we can't receive their messages. In other words, we're being unilaterally blocked. If that's the case, that's good. Hugo nodded and quickly sent a message to all the ship girls through the Admiral network, telling them that he was fine and with Victory. Therefore, they should continue as planned. After sending the message, Victory brought him and Hermione to the bushes at the top of the hill. It was then that Hugo saw the town in the distance. My God, where are we? After connecting to Victory's vision through the Admiral network, Hugo exclaimed softly he saw a town filled with Victorian architecture, people in old-fashioned clothing walking around, and a railway passing not far from the town. A train was pulling black smoke as it headed into the distance. Even more surprisingly, the surrounding temperature was much higher than before, and the vegetation was lush and green. It didn't look like early spring, but rather late summer or early autumn. Bad news, dear Admiral, Victory said, setting Hugo and Hermione down and closing her eyes. Soon, she opened them again and said to Hugo, we're in the wrong time. The wrong time? What do you mean? Because she was facing away from the town and it was far from the hill, Hermione asked curiously as soon as Victory finished speaking. Exactly what it sounds like, Victory said, leaning against a rock with a wry smile. If my senses are correct, we are now in the year 1899, 1899, the Granger siblings exclaimed in shock. Hermione immediately reached for her neck and pulled out the time turner hanging from her chain. Chapter 286 Destroyed Time Turner. My time turner seems to be broken. The moment Hermione took out the time turner, she realized something was wrong. Hugo saw Hermione pull out a long, delicate gold chain from under her robes, with a small, gleaming golden hourglass hanging from it. This was also the first time Hugo had seen such a precious magical artifact in person. However, unlike what he had seen in movies in his previous life, this hourglass wasn't filled with sand, but with a pure golden liquid. Your bracelet is also malfunctioning. Just then, Victory's voice came through the Admiral network. Hearing Victory's reminder, Hugo slightly pulled up his sleeve and discovered that the bracelet, originally made from the branches of a sacred oak tree and the scales of red and white dragons, had turned an unsightly gray-black color. This is, Hugo turned to look at Victory. Did you think a time turner comes without a price? Victory explained quickly. The more powerful the being trying to travel through time, the greater the price they have to pay, and this bracelet is your price. Of course, the power contained in just one bracelet is far from enough. So, I guess the golden chain that was wrapped around that rat's body back then is the core reason for all of this now. I see. Hugo nodded, suddenly understanding he had always been curious as to why there was such a way to travel through time and space, but neither Voldemort nor Dumbledore ever used it. Now it seemed it wasn't that they didn't want to, but that they couldn't. As for the golden chain wrapped around Peter, although Hugo couldn't guess the specific origin of that thing, he estimated that it should have been found in Hogwarts Castle. After all, this castle has a history of thousands of years, and many secrets are hidden within. Therefore, Peter, in his rat form, was very likely to have found some treasures left by his predecessors from some unknown corner. Of course, there was also good news. For example, because of Victory's presence, the most dangerous temporal effects wouldn't exist according to Victory, because the Victory-class sailing warship, which she was based on, existed in this era. She herself was a part of history here, and because of the connection between her and Hugo, as well as the blood connection between Hugo and Hermione, Victory could protect the Granger siblings through some means, preventing the future world from undergoing some huge changes due to the two people's actions. You should know that these changes are sometimes fatal. For example, in history, which is their current year of 1899, a unspeakable from the Department of Mysteries named Eloise Mintimble was trapped in 1402 for 5 days. When she returned to the present, her body had aged 5 centuries. Because the scars left by time could not be healed, she soon died of illness in the magical hospital. At the same time, during these 5 days, the life trajectories of everyone she encountered had changed. The descendants of at least 25 people were never born, and the life traces of more people had changed. The most worrying thing was that after Eloise returned to the present, Tuesday lasted for 2.5 days, while Thursday was only 4 hours long. So, from then on, the Ministry of Magic directly prohibited the study of time and established strict, even harsh, legal regulations on the use of such things. By the way, you two should change your clothes first, just as Hugo and Hermione were wondering how they got here. Victory opened her ship equipment space and took out a large pile of clothes. After all, the two people's clothes had been severely weathered before. In order to avoid the clothes on their bodies directly turning into beggars' clothes in a while, Hugo took the new clothes and was driven out of the bushes by the two ladies to change clothes for ship girls. Carrying a set of Admiral's clothing with them is a very normal thing, so Hugo quickly put on a very fitting Victorian-style men's suit. However, the situation on Hermione's side was a bit bad. Victory naturally wouldn't have her clothes prepared. So, in the end, Hermione looked a bit baggy after putting on Victory's own clothes. Don't laugh. Seeing Hugo, who was smiling as he came over from the bushes, Hermione immediately glared at her brother, and then looked at Victory with a worried face. Victory, what exactly happened to us? It should be the conflict of different magical qualities that caused the serious damage to this time turner? Victory looked carefully at the time turner in her hand and said, you know, since the serious accident in 1899, all time turners have been strictly regulated. In addition to having you sign a series of documents, these converters themselves have also been set up with multiple defenses. To give you the simplest example, a powerful magical restriction has been set on Hermione's time turner to prevent users from deliberately or unintentionally using these time turners beyond their limits. If I'm not mistaken, the ban on yours was set by an unspeakable. Unless the user can have magic 3 times stronger than Professor Flitwick, otherwise, it can only send people back 3 to 4 hours at most. But we have traveled almost 100 years. Speaking of this, Hermione was about to cry because when Professor McGonagall gave this thing to Hermione, she specifically reminded her of the consequences of misusing this thing. Among them, she specifically used Eloise Mintimble's example as a counterexample. Although Hermione usually appears calm and mature, she is only a 13-year-old girl now. The thought of lying in a hospital with wrinkled skin and white hair waiting to die naturally made her unable to hold back. Don't worry. As long as we hide and try to see as few people as possible and release as little magic as possible, those problems won't happen. Victory smiled and touched Hermione's hair and said, you won't encounter such a bad thing under my protection, because I exist in this era, so under my protection you are also equivalent to people who originally lived in this time period. Hermione, who was originally sniffling, widened her eyes after hearing what Victory said, and then looked at her with disbelief. But this is 1899, I was born in 1778, a smile that resembled a successful prank appeared on Victory's face. So, I'm already over 200 years old, is she kidding? Hermione turned to look at Hugo and asked. I remember that even Nicholas Flamel can only achieve immortality with the help of the Philosopher's Stone, but he can't achieve agelessness at all. Victory isn't kidding. Hugo smiled and shook his head. She is indeed over 200 years old now. And we actually went to see her specially when we were in the 3rd grade of elementary school. Are you kidding too? Hermione widened her eyes in surprise and looked at Victory. She felt that under normal circumstances, as long as she had met her once, she would not forget such a beautiful woman with silver hair, purple eyes, and an eye patch. But now, after desperately searching her memories from a few years ago, she found that there was no memory of this woman in her memory. Don't tease your sister, my dear Admiral. Seeing Hermione racking her brains to think about her identity, Victory first communicated with Hugo through the Admiral network, and then gave Hermione a salute. The British Royal Navy first-rate sailing battleship Victory salutes you. Respect for the soul and the sea. Chapter 287 Confession in Action. So, in the next hour, Hugo introduced his identity as an admiral, of course, concealing his secret as a transmigrator from another world initially. Hugo thought his sister would be surprised to hear such a somewhat absurd story, but he found Hermione to be much calmer than he had imagined. I felt that something was off since my second year, Hermione said with a smile, looking at Hugo's puzzled expression. If I'm not mistaken, Veneto and Firefly should be the ship girls you mentioned. Yes, but how did you figure it out, sister? Now it was Hugo's turn to be curious. It's simple because in my impression, you weren't someone who liked adventure, let alone being reckless. So whether it was facing the basilisk or bravely attacking in later competitions, it could only mean one thing: you had enough backup, Hermione said, shrugging her shoulders. At first, I thought it was because you had a good relationship with Veneto and dared to take risks because of your friend's abilities, but later, during the alchemy competition, I realized that Veneto wasn't your only backup. More importantly, we grew up together, and I probably know your learning ability better than you do yourself. Your rapid progress since entering Hogwarts is clearly not normal. You're really amazing, sister. After listening to Hermione's analysis, Hugo sincerely admired her observational skills, but then again, the two were twins after all. So even the slightest change in one person could easily be noticed by the other. It seems my analysis is completely correct. Hugo's reaction confirmed Hermione's thoughts, so she revealed another observation. If I'm not mistaken, Hood and her family should all be your ship girls, right? Yes, they are all the incarnations of some famous warships from World War II. Hugo nodded and said, you can get to know them properly next time we have a vacation. I have good news to tell you. Victory, who had been studying on the side, suddenly interrupted their conversation with a smile when Hugo and Hermione were almost done talking. According to my observation, this time Turner can only send us to this time period for 7 days, so after 7 days, we will be directly summoned back to the original time period. If that's the case, that's great. After hearing what Victory said, the Granger siblings relaxed at once. The anxiety they had previously felt due to the unknown nature of everything around them was swept away since Victory's presence prevented everyone from inexplicably getting into trouble due to the butterfly effect. They only needed to avoid contact with people and refrain from using magic as much as possible during this time to avoid any danger. Considering that 7 days wasn't that easy to pass, Hugo and the others quickly sat down and started chatting for Hermione. Listening to Ship Girl tell her own story was a completely new experience. As they chatted, Hermione gradually relaxed from her previous tense state and became familiar with Victory. After everyone finished lunch together, the two of them each took a telescope from Victory's hand and looked down at the Victorian era towns and villages below. After watching the old railway and the people walking around in ancient costumes for a while, Hermione began to search the surrounding environment. Soon, she discovered a special situation in the valley on the other side of the mountain. There are actually quite a few wizards living in the valley on this side of the mountain, Hermione said after looking through the brass telescope for a while, quickly noticing the unique features of the town below. I saw a wizard using the summoning charm on the lawn to find his lost money. What? After Hermione said this, Hugo also raised his telescope and looked in the direction she was pointing. Sure enough, he saw a witch using her wand to command a basin of clothes to wash themselves. Yes, there was indeed a cleaning charm in the wand, but for wizards who were even slightly particular, that spell was only used in emergencies. After all, the biggest problem with the cleaning charm was that it only cleaned the surface of the item, and could not remove odors from clothing, make the clothing fluffy, or clean up the various kinds of dirt that had seeped into the inside of the clothing. This was why Mrs. Weasley would command the brushes to scrub the dishes when she was at home. After all, no one wanted to taste the flavors of the previous meal, or even the meal before that, on the plates and utensils while eating. I'll go to the village tonight to see what this place is, Victory said. After all, the village below looks like a village where muggles and wizards live together, and this type of village is not very common in England. Next, in preparation for the night's activities, Hugo and the others took some time to practice. Fortunately, unlike Hugo and the others, Victory's spellcasting was not very restricted, so she could cast spells similar to the disillusionment charm on them, and the content of their training was very simple, which was how to determine the location of their companions while invisible, and what to do if they really got lost. Of course, the main subject of the training was Hermione. After all, Hugo could completely sense the location of every shipgirl through the Admiral network, so he didn't have to worry about people getting lost at all. Fortunately, Victory had corresponding plans for this aspect, and everyone believed that the probability of encountering combat when entering the village at night was not very high. So, in just one afternoon, they had prepared for the training and various possible scenarios. After night fell, Hugo and Hermione each drank the Polyjuice potion that Victory had previously stored in her ship equipment space. transforming into an ordinary-looking middle-aged man and woman, and then followed Victory down to the village. There wasn't much light pollution in this era, so when you looked up, you could see the deep blue sky and the slightly shimmering stars. However, even with the starlight, this kind of night road was very unfriendly to Hermione. For her, who had grown up in the city, the surrounding environment was too dark, so dark that she couldn't see the road at all. Realizing that Hermione didn't seem to be very suitable for walking at night, Victory simply carried her on her back, and then walked shoulder to shoulder with Hugo down the mountain. "I'm really troubling you, Sister Victory," Hermione apologized with an embarrassed expression, then turned her head to look at Hugo, who could only be seen as a blurry black shadow, with some curiosity. "Why can you see these roads at night?" "Because I can use the ship girl's vision," Hugo said as he ran forward. "It's a little trick that belongs to the Admiral." "Okay, that's really enviable." Looking at the darkness in front of her, Hermione said with envy in her voice this mountain road was not very far. So after Victory carried the burden of Hermione, the two of them moved much faster. Only 10 minutes later, they arrived at the outskirts of the small village, and their feet firmly stepped on the cobblestone road of the village. Chapter 288 Godric and Chapter X27, S Hollow. 20 years before this era, the electric light had already been invented, but it had not been widely adopted. Some large cities may have bright electric lights for illumination, but most areas still used open flames for lighting, just like in ancient times. For example, the town where Hugo and his companions were now was like this. Whether it was the pitch-black streets or the dimly lit windows, it showed that this town had not entered the age of electricity along with London or New York. However, this was not bad news for Hugo and his companions, because the darkness would hide their figures, making it easier for them to avoid the curious gazes of the townspeople. After turning right along the narrow alley and entering the town center, some light finally appeared in front of Hugo and his two companions. They had arrived at the small square in the center of the town. Unlike those dark alleys, several street lamps were lit around the square. Although these street lamps were all kerosene lamps, they still shrouded this core area of the town in a layer of dim yellow light. In the center of the square was a flower bed filled with various flowers and plants, and several cast iron benches were placed around the flower bed. However, because it was night, only a black cat stood there vigilantly on the benches. As the core of the town, various service facilities were also built around the square. For example, there were several shops, a post office, a bar, and a small church. Even at night, the stained glass radiated jewel-like brilliance across the square. Meow. Perhaps sensing that the surrounding environment was not quite right, the black cat meowed and jumped off the bench, then disappeared into the dark alleys around the square. At this moment, Hermione found a street sign on the side of the garden, and then looked up at the contents of the street sign. Godric's Hollow. "This is Godric's Hollow." After carefully looking at the words on the street sign by the dim yellow light, Hermione excitedly grabbed the hand that Hugo was holding. Hugo knew why his sister was so excited, because this was the birthplace of Godric Gryffindor, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts. And the place was named after him after the International Statute of Secrecy was signed into effect in 16. Wizards completely went into hiding. Perhaps naturally, they formed their own small communities within the community. Many small villages attracted several wizarding families, who united to help and protect each other. Tinworth in Cornwall, Upper Flagley in Yorkshire, and Ottery St. Catchpole on the south coast of England all had wizarding families living there, living among tolerant, and sometimes confounded, Muggles, and Godric's Hollow was the most famous of these Muggle and wizard mixed settlements. According to textbooks, in addition to the famous Gryffindor, it was also the place where the wizarding goldsmith Bowman Wright created the first golden snitch. I remember that there is a wizarding graveyard in this town, and the magic that wizards cast in the graveyard to avoid being discovered has also made this church the source of countless ghost stories in the town for centuries. Recovering from the shock caused by seeing this familiar place name, Hermione quickly remembered what she had learned in her history of magic class about this town, and if I remember correctly, Harry was actually born here. That's right, but the person living here now should be Henry Potter. Through the Shyandeo network, Hugo recalled the information on Pottermore from his previous life and said, he is Harry's great-grandfather and will be a member of the Wizengamot in the future. It's just that after the outbreak of World War I, the then Minister for Magic, Archer Evermond, in order to prevent the International Statute of Secrecy from being broken, prohibited the magical world from participating in it, and Henry Potter firmly believed that it was inhumane to stand by and watch without helping when Muggle neighbors were in mortal danger, so he publicly expressed strong condemnation of this. According to the information I saw before, the Potter family's reputation is actually similar to that of the Weasley family. And they have always been considered staunch pro-Muggle, Victory added in a low voice from the side. I think this is one of the reasons why their family, although an ancient pure-blood family, was excluded from the Sacred 28. Then why was the Weasley family included in that list? Hermione asked with some incomprehension. Because of Hugo's good relationship with the Weasley twins, Hermione was also relatively clear about some of the Weasley family's habits. Because the Potter family has always had a small population in the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the magical world, population is power, so compared to the prosperous Weasley family, those people naturally ignored Potter. Hugo shrugged and said just as they were chatting in low voices, Victory had already opened the gate to the cemetery with 2 pieces of wire he carried with him. Then the 3 of them slipped into the cemetery through the slightly open crack in the gate. This location was behind the church, and rows of tombstones stood quietly in the darkness, and the first tombstone at the entrance was engraved with the name Abbott. After quickly checking the tombstones closest to the entrance, Hugo and his companions discovered that these tombstones were arranged according to family and last name initials, with all the tombstones of one family placed together. Look at this. Less than 5 minutes after everyone started looking for familiar surnames here, Victory sent a signal to Hugo through the Shyandeo network. Hugo immediately pulled Hermione to a place beyond 2 rows of tombstones, then bent down and looked at the tombstone that Victory had marked, which didn't look too old. The tombstone was engraved with the name Kendra Dumbledore. And after a simple search around, they found another tombstone with the name Percival Dumbledore. Dumbledore was not a particularly common surname, so after seeing the words on these 2 tombstones clearly, Hermione immediately asked, "They are Headmaster Dumbledore's father and mother," Hugo explained in a low voice. Then the 3 of them came to a corner of the cemetery, and then Victory whispered about Headmaster Dumbledore's story when he was young. That is to say, this year Dumbledore's sister Ariana will die in a sudden conflict. As soon as Victory finished speaking, Hermione touched her mouth with some sadness. Yes, this matter not only permanently affected Headmaster Dumbledore himself, but also affected the entire wizarding world and Europe, Hugo said, looking at his sister. Because of this incident, our headmaster and his lover and like-minded companion Grindelwald completely broke off and later defeated the then Dark Lord Grindelwald in the war, and if it weren't for this incident, our headmaster might not have woken up so quickly. Then more people might have died in that war. Even the young headmaster might have been blinded by love, so that he didn't stand on the side of justice. Instead, he became a Dark Lord similar to Grindelwald. Stop talking. After hearing Hugo say this, Hermione shuddered. Just thinking about this possibility is despairing. Chapter 289 Unexpected Incidents. That evening, after confirming their location as Godric's Hollow and carefully examining the tombstones in the town's cemetery, Hugo and his companions returned to the small hill where they had previously hidden, under the cover of darkness. Although they also wanted to see a young Professor Dumbledore or Harry Potter's ancestors, they had to avoid any rooms with people to prevent serious temporal errors. Even after returning to the hill, they specifically built some hidden facilities to conceal their activities, in order to avoid being accidentally discovered by those wizards. Fortunately, Hugo, Hermione, and Victory were all very patient people. Therefore, after the first night's reconnaissance in the village, they had been hiding in a bunker on the hill because Victory was with them. They had enough food and water. After all, Victory carried enough supplies for 1,000 people to live for 90 days, which was more than enough for the 3 of them. At first, everything went smoothly, and everyone was quietly doing their own thing, chatting with each other when they had time. But soon, some unexpected changes occurred. Sis, wake up. On the 3rd day of their arrival in this time period, Hugo shook Hermione awake again, who had fallen asleep while reading a book next to him, and frowned. Did I fall asleep again? After being called by Hugo, Hermione quickly woke up and shook her head, then looked at him and asked, "Yes, you just fell asleep again," Hugo said with a smile. To be honest, it's indeed a bit boring to just read books these days. So it's normal to feel sleepy. Have you figured out what's going on with my sister? After comforting Hermione, Hugo took out a book, sat on the side, pretending to read, and inquired Victory through the Commander Network. Why do I feel like my sister has been getting sleepier these days? She's never been like this before. I feel like something's wrong. I also wanted to talk to you about this. I just discovered some unexpected things about your sister, Victory said to Hugo after a few seconds of pause. After hearing his commander's question, "What's wrong with my sister now?" Hearing what Victory said, Hugo immediately showed a nervous expression. However, he quickly reacted, raised the book to cover his face, and asked anxiously, "You better get out of the room first. because the following news may not be so good, Victory said bluntly. If you can't control your emotions for a while and let your sister notice, it will be terrible. What exactly happened? After finding an excuse to walk out of the room, Hugo looked at Victory standing under a tree not far away and said softly, "This kind of unheralded sleepiness is very strange, because everything I've experienced during this time is no different from my sister, but I've never felt so sleepy. It's simple. It's because of the difference in physical fitness," Victory said in a low voice. "Hermione is not quite the same as the two of us, she is a pure human. So, when facing the conflict of different times during this time travel, she is naturally more fragile." With Victory's explanation, Hugo slowly understood what was happening to his sister. This was a unique danger of time travel, to put it simply. When a person leaves their original time and enters another time, they will be harmed by the huge difference between the two time periods. So, I admire those obliviators who can encapsulate the originally unstable and container-supported time-turner spell in a magical hourglass and make it controllable even by young wizards, Victory said, taking out the time-turner he had obtained from Hermione's side from his pocket, and then carefully explained the internal protection mechanism of the time-turner to Hugo. And in order to prevent the user from being in danger, a normal time-turner will extract at least half of its power to protect the user. However, our accidental journey completely broke this protection, because the time we regressed was too long, and the number of people using it exceeded the limit. Therefore, the above protection is unable to be extended to the user, so, my sister is now suffering direct damage from time because she has lost her protection. Hugo frowned, then asked, "How serious is this damage?" "Very serious," Victory said with a serious expression, "although, because of me, it won't lead to the time from the two time periods rebounding on the time traveler in one breath after returning to the original time period. But the incompatibility caused by different time periods will inevitably occur. What's worse is that this damage will mainly manifest in the soul rather than the body. According to my judgment, drowsiness is only the mildest problem. If this situation continues, soul decay will be inevitable. Then what should I do?" Hugo's face showed a worried expression. After all, this time travel was largely caused by his desire to catch Peter after discovering him, so, in this situation, it was already terrible to involve Hermione. If his sister was hurt because of this, Hugo felt that he would never forgive himself. There are two ways. One is to use the Philosopher's Stone, or a similar item whose essence is to fight against time as the core to create a special magic shield. Victory said the first plan, but was interrupted by Hugo halfway through. "Change to the next one. This plan is too late." Hugo shook his head. "Even if we count today, we only have 5 days to work. Even if I have a complete Philosopher's Stone manufacturing process in my mind now, it's too late to make this thing. Not to mention that the Philosopher's Stone itself is a symbol of alchemical technology reaching its peak. Although I say that my current level in this area is no less than most adult alchemists, there is still a big gap compared to the level required to create the Philosopher's Stone. Then the next method will be more troublesome." Victory glanced at Hermione's hiding place, and then said softly, "You know, there are not many existences that can resist the erosion of time, and memory is one of them." "Of course I know this. After all, one of the important reasons why you can travel through the long time unscathed is that you have left traces in human memory." Hugo nodded in agreement. "But you know that my sister is an ordinary person, someone who is not remembered by many people except for close people like family and friends. So even the most basic requirements cannot be met if you want to use this trick. Yes, theoretically it won't work. But don't forget your previous world. And in that world, your sister can also be considered a famous person." Victory smiled and lowered his voice. "Because of your special nature, we can use you as a medium to communicate with the two worlds to transform your sister, and that should be able to save your sister." Chapter 290 Conversion. Compared to other ship girls, Victory, due to her original form being a sailing warship, is far behind other ship girls in terms of pure combatability. However, because she has also been working as a system spirit, she has a much deeper understanding of the entire system than other ship girls. Therefore, when facing sudden situations like Hermione's, Victory was able to come up with a feasible plan in a very short period of time to deal with the current situation. However, after Victory spent more than half an hour explaining the overall plan, Hugo realized that the plan Victory was taking this time was a special plan he would never have thought of before. "Are you saying you want to transform my sister into a ship girl? Are you kidding me?" Hugo stared at Victory sitting across from him. "I think you should know that no matter what, my sister is, of course, I know Miss Granger is a human being." Victory said with a serious face, but the problem now is that in order to solve the damage caused by the erosion of time on her, she must undergo a series of transformations. You know, although there are not many existences that can travel through time and space, there are not few. For example, poltergeists like Peeves, phoenixes, or obscurials can all do this, but for us, we are only familiar with the existence of ship girls. We can only upgrade people in this direction. Other solutions are not realistic. I understand. Hugo nodded and stood up. I'm going to tell my sister about this now. I hope she can realize the danger involved and cooperate with her actions. What if she doesn't cooperate? Victory asked with some concern. You know that humans and ship girls are completely two different creatures, and not everyone can embrace this change all at once. If she doesn't cooperate, I will force her to cooperate. After hearing Victory's question, Hugo was stunned for a moment, and then said firmly, anyway, this process is not impossible to force. If it can save her life, I don't mind bearing the infamy. After speaking, Hugo asked Victory to guard the entrance of the hideout, and then he walked into the hideout and said to Hermione, who was sitting on the cushion against the wall reading a book, Sis, I have something I need to discuss with you. So that's how it is. No wonder I've been feeling that my thinking has become sluggish these past few days, and my whole person is getting more and more wrong. I thought I was going to become a vegetable. After Hugo finished telling her the ins and outs, Hermione closed the book and said gently, if you guys are all prepared, then I will cooperate with you with all my strength. At least in my opinion, the plan you are proposing now is the best plan under this circumstance. I want to remind you, Hermione, Victory said at this time, ship girls are a completely different existence from humans. They even have huge differences in their life forms from most creatures. For example, after becoming a ship girl, you only need basic resources to survive. You don't need to eat, drink, or even breathe. Therefore, you may need to relearn a lot of basic and trivial things. I understand all of this. After listening to Victory's long speech, Hermione's lips curled up slightly, revealing a smile. However, from another perspective, isn't this change a gift? At least from your description, I can feel that compared to ship girls, human bodies are really too fragile. Even wizards who master magic are not much stronger, and now I can actually get such an opportunity because of an accident, an opportunity to become a more powerful existence and even gain eternal life. Isn't this something to celebrate? Obviously, Hermione is an optimist and not conservative. So she is happy to see herself changing races. This is naturally good news for Hugo. Although he still has a way to carry out this complete transformation for Hermione under coercion, the effect will naturally be much better if his sister is willing to cooperate, at least if the transformed person's resistance is too serious. Then in the final stage, there will be a lot of problems in the transmission of basic knowledge about ship girls. The most obvious consequence of these problems is that the newborn ship girl lacks various memories that should be instinctive, resulting in the need to spend a lot of extra time and energy to master those knowledge that should be instinctive. And if the transformed person fully cooperates in this process, then it will take less than a week to be not much different from those real ship girls. After confirming that Hermione was to be transformed, Hugo was kicked out of the hideout by Victory. According to Victory, Hermione would be wearing less clothes when she undergoes her soul transformation next, so even if Hugo and Hermione are siblings, he is not suitable to stay in this hideout. So Hugo, who was kicked out of the room, could only helplessly dig another hideout next to this hideout, preparing to use it as his residence for the next few days. In the next 2 days or so, Victory and Hermione stayed in the hideout almost 24 hours a day, and Hugo could only confirm the situation inside through the Admiral network. According to Victory, Hermione's soul had already suffered serious damage after staying in this time and space for less than 3 days without protection. Fortunately, everyone discovered it in time before, so if the soul is transformed in time now, there should be no bad consequences. So your keen observation saved your sister, Victory said to Hugo through the Admiral network while putting Hermione in a wooden barrel and boiling her with potion. If you had discovered something was wrong later, even if it was only a day later, Hermione's soul would have suffered some irreversible damage. According to my judgment, forgetting a part of her memory would have been the best result at that time. In case she loses part of her lifespan or spellcasting ability due to soul damage, it would be really troublesome. So, this is the blessing of the sea. After spending a long time with the ship girls, Lion also learned some of the ship girls' unique catchphrases. Let us be able to solve the problem before things get worse. By the way, how many destiny points will this process take? After chatting for a few words, Hugo suddenly asked. Because he had to consume destiny points every day for the past few days, he was a little worried that his destiny points would not be able to hold on. "Don't worry, it won't be too much." After hearing Hugo's question, Victory immediately replied. "The biggest problem now is that your sister cannot occupy the original position of other ship girls, so she can only become a special non-staff ship girl. That is to say, Hermione will become a new ship girl who has a warship in the original history, but has never appeared as a ship girl here. The difficulty of creating this extra ship girl is not small, but fortunately, we have found the most suitable prototype for your sister in a similar world, and we also have ship girls of the same level among our sisters. Therefore, under the premise that you communicate with the two worlds, it will only take 1.5 times the destiny points and 3 days of time to recruit an ordinary ship girl of the same level, and we will be able to complete the creation of this new ship girl. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 Dumbledore Family. After learning that his sister and Victory were both doing well, Hugo relaxed. As he was idly looking down the mountain with his binoculars, he unexpectedly spotted two red-haired young men arguing in a courtyard. These two young men had red hair and blue eyes, and they looked very similar, suggesting they were brothers. However, judging from their actions, they were arguing fiercely, even giving the impression that they might start fighting at any moment. At the doorway of the room behind them, a blonde girl timidly clutched the door frame, watching them with a worried expression. This should be Headmaster Dumbledore and his younger siblings, Hugo thought, recalling the wizard-only signpost he had seen in the village yesterday. He immediately understood what he was witnessing. If Hugo remembered correctly, Headmaster Dumbledore's sister was an obscurial, having become one at the age of 6 after being attacked by several Muggle boys. Because of that incident, Dumbledore's father was sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban for revenge, eventually dying there. Dumbledore's mother also died during one of Ariana's obscurest outbursts. Hugo had previously found the graves of Dumbledore's parents in the cemetery behind the village church. Judging from the inscription on the tombstone, Dumbledore's mother had not been dead for very long. Because of his mother's death, Dumbledore had to abandon his plans to travel the world after graduation and instead chose to stay home to care for his sister. However, Headmaster Dumbledore at this time was different from the kind and gentle old man of a century later. He was full of sharp edges and not entirely happy about having to stay home and take care of his sister. Then Grindelwald arrived, which was a great encouragement to Dumbledore because he believed Grindelwald was one of the few people as intelligent and talented as himself, and he was naturally deeply attracted to him. Dumbledore became completely immersed in the plan to establish a new wizarding order, searching for the Hallows, and doing everything that he and Grindelwald were very interested in for the sake of his grand goals and the supposed interests of the entire wizarding world. Dumbledore devoted almost all of his energy to this, naturally neglecting the care of Ariana. Unlike the young Professor Dumbledore, his brother Aberforth did not have great ambitions and focused more on family. So, he was naturally dissatisfied with his brother and Grindelwald being together all day and neglecting their sister. Therefore, the two often argued about taking care of their sister, and Hugo was likely witnessing one of those many arguments between the Dumbledore brothers. However, they had only argued for a few sentences before Ariana seemed frightened and started crying loudly. Helplessly, Aberforth could only glare at his brother before going to comfort his sister. "I think we might be able to see the moment Ariana died," Hugo said as he shared what he saw to the Admiral Network. Victory quickly replied through the Admiral Network, "In my memory, Aberforth specifically pointed out in his recollections in the 7th book that his sister died in the summer of the year Dumbledore graduated, which is 1899. Moreover, he specifically pointed out that the holiday was about to end and he was planning to return to Hogwarts, which means the tragedy happened at the end of August. Most importantly, when we went to the village to scout on the night we arrived, I saw a newspaper posted on the village bulletin board, and the date on the newspaper was August 25th, 1899. That is to say, we are going to witness a tragedy," Hugo said, sounding somewhat uneasy, as watching an innocent life disappear was a terrible thing, "but we can only observe," Victory said in a serious tone after hearing Hugo's words. "Please don't forget that changing time is extremely dangerous, and even I would only face certain death in this situation." "Yes, I understand that," Hugo assured her after hearing Victory's words. "But I hope to get closer and take a look when the time comes. After all, who killed Ariana has always been a mystery, so since I have accidentally arrived at this place, I really want to see what happened. Going to see is certainly possible, but considering that Grindelwald is very powerful in spellcasting at this time, I suggest you watch indirectly to avoid any interaction that could trigger a temporal backlash. For ship girls, they often put their admiral's orders first. Therefore, when Hugo proposed to observe the Dumbledore family conflict, Victory did not stop him but quickly analyzed the feasibility of the action. So, when Hugo returned to the hideout from the observation point, Victory had already packed the necessary items in a small box and placed it at the entrance of the hideout. As soon as he opened the box, Lynn saw a crystal ball and 10 wax figures the size of palms inside. According to Victory, this was a special monitoring device, its power coming purely from the ship girl without any elements of the wizarding world. Therefore, for someone who is using this for the first time, even someone with high sensitivity to various powers would not realize what it was. For in addition to this set of equipment, there was also a folded invisibility cloak at the bottom of the box. Although it was only a temporary invisibility cloak that could last for a week at most, it was enough for Hugo. So, that night, Hugo, transformed into a non-European admiral, draped the invisibility cloak around himself and set up the wax figures around the Dumbledore house. The next morning, he began to monitor the situation of the Dumbledore family. Sure enough, on the 6th day of arriving at this place, Hugo saw the Dumbledore brothers arguing in the yard again through the crystal ball. However, unlike before, Grindelwald had also joined the argument this time. At this time, Hermione's conversion was coming to an end and did not require anyone to accompany her. So, Victory also came out of the previous hideout and watched the crystal ball with Hugo with great interest. "They're fighting," Victory suddenly exclaimed softly. 15 minutes after the two sides started arguing, Hugo immediately focused his attention on the crystal ball and saw Aberforth and Grindelwald simultaneously draw their wands and attack each other. "Grindelwald is indeed a dark wizard and leans more towards the evil side," Victory said definitively after watching the first exchange between the two. After all, in a normal situation, when a conflict requires action, normal people generally use the disarming charm or some minor jinxes, or at most a stunning spell. No one starts with a Cruciatus curse. Just like arguing with ordinary people, it is understandable to exchange punches when you are angry. But to directly pull out a knife and stab someone to death can only mean that the person either has a problem with their brain or has an innate tendency towards evil violence. Chapter 292 Death of Ariana. Not long after Albus Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth, and Grindelwald simultaneously made their moves, Headmaster Dumbledore himself joined the battle. After all, he didn't want either his brother or his friend to be harmed. "The geniuses in the wizarding world are indeed very powerful," Victory commented, sending the analysis report to Hugo through the Admiral network while watching the duel in the courtyard below. "I can see that their spellcasting timing and angles are excellent, but I'm not very clear about the spells they're casting," Hugo said, expressing his own views. "Is there something to be said about that?" "Of course, there's something to be said," Victory said, keeping a close eye on the crystal ball. "You know, since Javelin completed her training and became a trainee Auror, we've obtained the complete set of training methods and data of the British Aurors, and comparing it with this data, you'll find that even the weakest of the three people fighting below, Aberforth, has surpassed the bottom third of the Aurors in terms of magical mastery and combat proficiency. As for the strongest, Grindelwald, I believe he can easily defeat 3 to 5 Aurors of Moody's level in a sudden battle, and he can also retreat unscathed when facing more than 10 Aurors of that level. Is this the strength of the first Dark Lord?" After Victory's explanation, Hugo's face showed a look of emotion because he used to only know that those top wizards were very powerful, but he was still vague about exactly how powerful they were now. After Victory's comparison, Hugo immediately understood why the individual combat power of wizards was so important in the wizarding world. Because those powerful wizards can indeed turn the tide of battles between different groups on their own. "Look out, Ariana is coming out." At this moment, Victory reminded him in a low voice. Seeing this, Hugo immediately pulled up the image projected by the statue on a tree next to the Dumbledore's house. Sure enough, at this time, Ariana, who had been hiding in the room, was probably stimulated by the flashes and loud noises of the battle between her brothers and Grindelwald, so she stumbled out of the room. However, at this time, the obscurus on Ariana's body didn't lose control, but just raised her arms and rushed into the battlefield, trying to stop everyone from fighting. Unfortunately, the three people who were already fighting fiercely couldn't stop. So Ariana was hit by a spell and fell directly to the ground after only rushing into the battlefield where spells were flying for less than 5 seconds. "It was Grindelwald who cast a killing curse," Victory said in a low voice, keeping an eye on the situation. and it feels like he did it on purpose, because although the Dumbledore brothers were angry, they still maintained the last bit of composure. So, throughout the battle, neither of them released fatal magic like the Killing Curse, and Grindelwald only released magic equivalent to the Cruciatus Curse at most at the beginning, but after Ariana came out, he directly hit her with a Killing Curse. But why? Hugo frowned and asked through the Admiral network. Although Grindelwald is the kind of person who kills people as easily as eating and drinking, he's not a lunatic like Voldemort. That is to say, he doesn't kill people because of his own likes and dislikes. Every time he kills someone, there must be a reason. And I can't figure out for the moment why he killed a 14-year-old girl who had no grievances with him, and had only met him a few times. I guess it might be related to Dumbledore, Victory said at this time. Maybe Grindelwald thinks that the main reason why an excellent person like Dumbledore is unwilling to work with him for the so-called New World is because his sister is holding him back. Therefore, he would feel that if he killed Dumbledore's sister, then maybe Dumbledore would leave home and fight with him for that greater plan. You see, in this kind of melee, because the situation is very chaotic, everyone involved in the battle, especially those with poorer skills, will put all their energy into the battle, so naturally they can't observe those situations that are not related to the battle. So, if Dumbledore really values ambition more than family affection, he can completely blame his sister's death on his brother, and then embark on the path to becoming the next Dark Lord. Although I don't want to admit it, what you said is the most reasonable possibility. After listening to Victory's analysis, Hugo was stunned for a moment, and then sighed. Although he had indeed been attracted by Grindelwald's decisiveness and grand ideals when he watched the movies in his previous life, he later discovered that Grindelwald didn't have the greatness and righteousness he had shown at the beginning. To give the simplest example, the practice of indiscriminately killing innocent people for the sake of a plan, and even planning to destroy the entire Paris, completely contradicted his proclaimed goal of pursuing the future of wizards. If you have to make an analogy, Grindelwald has the demeanor of a World War II German leader, claiming to build a new world belonging to part of the people, but in fact, it must be built on a series of anti-human crimes. And today's incident shows that Grindelwald didn't gradually deteriorate in the process of struggle, but that he had that anti-human tendency from the beginning, but he later tried to cover up these things in the propaganda of time. However, if you think about it carefully, you will find that Grindelwald had already shown signs in this regard. For example, being expelled from Durmstrang for studying dark magic. You need to know that the dark magic in this world is closely linked to the user's heart. People who don't use dark magic well may not be good people, but people who use dark magic very smoothly are definitely not good people. To give the simplest example, although Snape repented and cleared himself of his sins at the end of his life, everything he did before can be said to be very bad. Taking his time as a professor as an example, you will find that except for the students of Slytherin, almost all students think that Snape is a very biased person. And this is also likely to be related to his learning to use dark magic back then, especially considering that Durmstrang itself is known among European schools for its tolerance of dark magic, and even offers special courses to teach dark magic. Then, if he could be expelled from such a school for the crime of using dark magic, then what was Grindelwald doing at that time can basically be inferred. Just as Hugo and Victory were discussing Grindelwald's affairs, another change took place on the field below. Several people finally discovered that Ariana had fallen at this time. The Dumbledore brothers immediately rushed to their sister to check on her. Because no one noticed how Ariana fell just now, they thought their sister was only injured, and Grindelwald looked around at this time, then quickly retreated to the edge of the hedge, and then jumped over the hedge and ran away. Chapter 293 System Wizard. I think it's time for us to retreat as well, Victory said softly to Hugo, watching Dumbledore's brothers weeping over their sister's body and Grindelwald running further and further away along the village path. At the same time, she was making gesture after gesture in front of her chest, causing the wax figures that had been placed around the Dumbledore's house to quickly turn into gas and evaporate into the air. However, just as they were destroying the wax figure closest to the Dumbledore's house, the one placed on the treetop, the situation suddenly changed. The instant the statue disappeared, Hugo felt a powerful surge of energy carrying information rushing back. What? Before Hugo could react, he saw a beam of light suddenly rush into the crystal ball along the magical connection between the statue and the crystal ball, and then pour into the Admiral network. Damn it, it's an Obscurus. Victory immediately sensed what this thing that had rushed back was. Normally, an Obscurus would die with the death of its host, but now, Victory quickly submitted her analysis about herself to Hugo through the Admiral network. But at this time Hugo couldn't listen to Victory's explanation. because he felt that this energy full of destruction was eroding the Admiral network. Fortunately, Hugo at this time was completely different from when he had just obtained the Admiral network a few years ago, so he could mobilize all his energy to fight against this destructive energy. As the confrontation continued, the energy within the Admiral network began to gradually smooth out the chaos contained in the invading energy, and then began to absorb and merge this force little by little. This is actually not purely destructive energy. As the confrontation began to ease, Hugo gradually peeled away the black energy in his vision, revealing the milky white brilliance within. This seems to be a soul. Victory, who had been helping Hugo guide the energy from the side, carefully stretched her perception and bit by bit, and saw a shocking scene. A little girl composed purely of white light was curled up in the center of that black energy, looking as if she was asleep. And a completely pure energy emanated from her. Could this be Ariana's soul? After sharing the vision with the Victory, Hugo carefully looked at the little girl's face, and then looked surprised. That's very possible, my dear Admiral, Victory said after carefully observing. I can confirm that this white light is indeed a soul, a pure soul. This is simply. Hugo took a deep breath, while a look of helplessness appeared on his face. But soon he thought of a suspicious point that he hadn't considered before. Wait, did you just say this is a pure soul? Hugo frowned. If I remember correctly, humans shouldn't possess this kind of pure soul after they are born, right? Yes, theoretically that's the case. But Ariana's situation is quite special, Victory said, while manipulating her consciousness to check the white glowing soul. Don't forget, this poor girl has coexisted with the Obscurus for even longer than she has had independent consciousness. So her soul has also been gradually destroyed in the collision of this power. That's why the Obscural's condition will gradually worsen with age, because their souls will gradually be worn away, and finally completely disappear, and after losing the foundation of the Obscural's soul, the Obscurus in the Obscural's body will completely run wild, leading itself to destruction as well. It's just that the situation on the Dumbledore family's side seems to be a bit abnormal. Whether it's Credence, who is suspected of being a member of the Dumbledore family in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, or Ariana, they have both lived much longer than other Obscurals of the same type. I suspect this may be related to the Dumbledore family's contract with the Phoenix, Hugo said, touching his chin. You know, the Phoenix represents rebirth and immortality. If a family has a contract with a Phoenix passed down, then the bloodline of their family may also be subtly influenced by the power of the Phoenix. For example, possessing stronger vitality and recovery ability. In this case, as long as the speed at which the Obscurus damages the Obscural itself does not exceed the speed at which the Phoenix's power recovers, then I think such an Obscural should be able to live for a long time. As Hugo and Victory communicated, the speed at which the energy flowing in the Admiral network regulated the energy from the Obscurus became faster and faster. Finally, the last bit of black mist in the Admiral network disappeared. I seem to feel that the system seems to have a desire for the soul. Just as the black mist disappeared, Hugo suddenly felt that the Admiral network, which was usually unresponsive, suddenly had some kind of response to him. Your feeling is correct, Admiral, Victory said, turning her head. As she was also connected to the Admiral network, I can feel that the Admiral network seems to think that this soul can make up for the defects of the entire Admiral network. Make up for defects? A solemn look appeared on Hugo's face. He knew that this system was his root, but he really couldn't bring himself to strengthen himself with an innocent soul after all. As far as he was concerned, the current Admiral network and the entire Ship Girl system were already powerful enough. So Hugo had the capital to refuse some practices that violated his values. I'm very glad to see that you, Admiral, can have such a kind heart. But this kind of replenishment is not the kind of self-sacrificing replenishment like Pangu, but rather summoning a new system spirit like me. After carefully communicating with the entire system, Victory said to Hugo with a smile she was actually very happy that her Admiral could always remain kind. After all, ship girls themselves are kind creatures, so naturally they hoped that their Admiral would be the same. In other words, she could become Ella. After a brief thought, Hugo realized that if this soul really turned into a system spirit in the end, then the only possibility would be to become Ella after all. Almost all other system spirits are ship girls, and only Ella, the system spirit, is the only non-ship girl existence. After confirming that this approach would not destroy this bit of soul, Hugo safely allowed his system to gradually merge this soul, and then invested a normal 1.5 times, that is, 1.5 points of destiny points. After completing these tasks, Hugo found that the soul gradually entered the deepest part of the Admiral network, and then was wrapped by layers of threads composed of light. When will our new system spirit be able to come out? Looking at the cocoon in the depths of the soul, Hugo first breathed a sigh of relief, and then asked Victory beside him, 100 days, which means she will be able to come out at the end of this semester. Victory said after a simple perception. Of course, she may not be quite like me, that's understandable, after all, she comes from the soul of a deceased person, not from legends like you. Hugo nodded, and then looked at the Dumbledore brothers in the distance, who were weeping while holding their sister's body, and sighed. Although Hugo knew that this was history, sometimes knowing it from books or from others and experiencing it personally were completely two different concepts. Therefore, he now felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Chapter 294 Return. In the time that followed, the Dumbledore family began to hold a funeral for their sister. Then, the two brothers started fighting at the funeral, or rather, the headmaster was unilaterally beaten by his younger brother. Headmaster Dumbledore must have remembered his sister's passing for the rest of his life, which is why he never healed the mark this punch left on his nose. However, at this time, Hugo was no longer focusing his attention on the Dumbledore family down the mountain, because his sister was about to complete the final step of becoming a ship girl. Alright, everything's settled. Finally, on the second to last day of staying in this timeline, Victory walked out of the shelter, looking exhausted, and signaled Hugo to enter. As soon as Hugo entered the room, he smelled a strong mixture of engine oil and steel. Through the sunlight leaking through the hole in the top of the shelter, he saw Hermione lying quietly on the bed. Her authority seems to be much greater than yours, Hugo said after sensing through the Admiral network. For example, most of my forced commands can't work on her, that's for sure. After all, your sister is a ship girl converted from a living person with a complete soul, so she's naturally quite different from most of our sisters. Victory nodded and said, by the way, which ship has my sister been converted into? Seeing that Hermione's condition was good and she might wake up at any time, Hugo breathed a sigh of relief and asked, British Royal Navy Arethusa class light cruiser, HMS Hermione. Victory replied. Precisely because of the same name, I was able to use the name as an anchor to guide the power and create a ship girl that didn't exist before out of thin air. Historically, this warship was named after Hermione, the daughter of Helen of Troy, but when this ancient Greek name became English, it became Hermione. From this, it can be seen that the Granger couple were standard literature enthusiasts, so they chose their daughter's name from classical literature. Achoo. Just then, Hermione, lying on the bed, stretched and sat up, then looked at Hugo and asked, is everything done? It's completely done, my dear sister. Hugo reached out and pulled Hermione, who seemed a little confused after the transformation, off the bed. And then together with Victory, guided her to master her newly acquired power. It feels very strange. Hermione took a deep breath and said, for example, breathing is like this now. I habitually breathe air, but I also know that my body doesn't need to breathe now. Actually, you're already doing very well, Hermione, Victory said with a smile. The first thing we learn when we come to this world is to pretend to be breathing, so as to avoid being seen as abnormal by others. Hugo smiled as he watched Victory teach his sister. Obviously, Victory was selectively telling Hermione some things to build her confidence. For example, as Victory said, ship girls do need to learn how to live like humans after coming to this world, but on the other hand, because of the existence of the Admiral network and the ship girls' completely different souls and bodies from humans, they only need a few minutes to acquire this knowledge through memory implantation. The situation of Hermione, a ship girl who became one halfway, is completely different. Because of the innate difference in soul, she needs a period of time to slowly adapt to the changes in her body. So, in the following time, Hugo and Victory took turns using the Admiral network to teach Hermione what to do next, and Hermione absorbed this knowledge quickly like a newborn baby. I finally know why Venator can easily break a giant's knee. That night, Hermione, who had mastered the basic knowledge, picked up a stone from the ground and crushed it into pieces with her hand. This is a very powerful force, yes, so you have to learn to control it, lest the uncontrolled power hurt others, Hugo said, looking at his sister. Fortunately, these are all imprinted on your soul with the transformation, so it may only take a week or two to sort everything out. Fortunately, Hermione was a smart person, so when the moment came for them to return to their original time a day later, she had already mastered her power to a low degree. So, during the space transfer, although she grabbed Hugo's arm nervously, she at least didn't break his arm unexpectedly. This time travel caused very little temporal and spatial displacement in the original timeline. Because as soon as they came out, They saw Enterprise grabbing a rat with a gold chain around its body and lifting it off the ground at the same time. Hugo and the others all felt a tingling sensation, as if an electric current was passing through their bodies, but it didn't cause them any impact. Just like Hugo and the others had guessed before, this 7-day time travel still had a certain degree of impact on their bodies, but fortunately, everyone can now ignore these effects. Welcome back. Also, your trip didn't affect this basic timeline. Because of the connection on the Admiral network, Enterprise understood what had happened before the moment Hugo and the others appeared. That's good. If our time travel had turned the world into a world ruled by Grindelwald or that noseless freak, then our sins would be, Hugo said with a smile, but before he could finish speaking, a very slight cracking sound came from Hermione's chest, like hard-soled rubber shoes stepping on a cement floor covered with broken glass. What's wrong? Everyone present had much stronger hearing than humans, so after hearing this sound of glass breaking, everyone looked nervously at the place where the sound came from. The time turner is broken. Hermione was stunned at first, and then nervously grabbed the gold chain around her neck and pulled out the time turner. Sure enough, the time turner, which had been filled with golden liquid before, had returned to its previous appearance, except that now a large number of cracks were all over the time turner, looking as if it could shatter at any time. Considering your previous time travel, it's far beyond everyone's expectations that this time turner could last until now, Enterprise said, taking the gold chain off Peter, who had turned into rat. If I'm not mistaken, all of this should be related to this gold necklace. Unfortunately, the energy collision just now was too severe, so all the clues on the gold chain have completely disappeared. Hugo took the gold chain, only to find that it was a necklace made of pure gold, with a golden sun the size of a little finger hanging at the end of the necklace. The whole thing was full of medieval style. After carefully examining it, Hugo found that there had been complex alchemical traces on this gold chain before, and it should be an alchemical product. It's just that after forming an energy resonance with a time turner hanging on Hermione's neck before, the powerful energy impact completely erased the original alchemical circuits, so it's now just a golden handicraft. It seems that we can't find any clues now. Hugo sighed, then looked at the rat in Enterprise's hand. What should we do next? Chapter 295 Peter appears. That rat looks just like Ron's pet rat, Hermione said, recognizing the rat held in Enterprise's hand. Just as Hugo was asking Enterprise what to do next, it had to be said that Peter's appearance after turning into a rat was quite distinctive. Therefore, one could easily recognize the rat's identity with a simple glance. I'm afraid we can't return this rat to Ron for the time being, because this rat is an illegal animagus, so I need to hand it over to Headmaster Dumbledore, Enterprise said, shaking her head. It turned out that after Hugo and Hermione disappeared in that burst of light, she decisively used a stunning spell to knock out the rat with a gold chain wrapped around its body, which was also stunned by the flash after subconsciously completing the attack. Enterprise first confirmed Hugo's survival through the Admiral network, then stepped forward to examine the rat and finally confirmed its identity, because of the training I received before. The stunning spell I use is much stronger than the stunning spells used by ordinary wizards. If it were a real rat, it would definitely be dead after taking such a hit. Enterprise explained the magical effects used by wizards are closely related to the type of spell used and the intensity of magic power. The law of miracles through great force also exists in the casting of many spells. For example, the purpose of the stunning spell is originally to stun the target, but after the intensity of this spell reaches a certain value, it can cause fatal damage to the target. Similarly, the target's own physical fitness will also determine the killing effect of the spell. For example, under normal circumstances, a stunning spell that can knock out an adult wizard would be fatal if it landed on a small animal like a chicken or a rat, and a rat that wears a gold chain that can cause such a big commotion and can't be killed by a stunning spell is obviously not normal. Therefore, as a form horror, it is reasonable for Enterprise to conduct a comprehensive study of this rat. Animagus, Hermione exclaimed, then looked at the rat in Enterprise's hand. Unfortunately, one couldn't tell if there was anything wrong with the rat just by looking at it with the naked eye. However, she believed that Enterprise wouldn't fabricate anything in this regard, so she followed everyone and directly abandoned the original plan, walked into the castle, and went straight to Headmaster Dumbledore's office. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, Enterprise said directly to the stone monster at the entrance of the headmaster's office. After hearing the password, the stone monster immediately jumped aside. A wall behind split in two. Under Enterprise's lead, they walked up the moving stone staircase and arrived at the bright door. There was a griffin door knocker on the door. Enterprise stepped forward, grabbed the door knocker, and knocked on the door. Then, After the door opened, she pulled the Granger siblings in together unexpectedly. There were several people in the headmaster's office at this time. In addition to Headmaster Dumbledore, there was also Deputy Headmistress Professor McGonagall, a very serious-looking female official from the Ministry of Magic, and two aurors in uniform. After all, Professor Dumbledore is not just a headmaster, but also the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, so he naturally has countless tasks to do on weekdays. Has something happened? Professor McGonagall asked with a puzzled look after seeing Enterprise walking carrying an unconscious rat. What's going on with this field mouse? This is Ron's pet Scabbers, and it has lived in the Weasley family for more than 10 years, Enterprise said, placing the unconscious field mouse on the table. However, an accident happened today that made me have to conduct a comprehensive examination of this rat, and the result was that it is an animagus. After speaking, Enterprise recounted her experience just now. At the same time, the Granger siblings, who had already discussed with each other through the Admiral network, also added to the story. However, the Granger siblings also knew that it was best to keep the story of that previous time travel permanently secret, so they only said that they inexplicably appeared in a place they didn't recognize, and then returned without warning after staying there for a day. After narrating the story, Hermione took off the broken time turner from her neck and placed it on the table, then stood back next to Hugo at the same time. Enterprise also took out a gold chain from her pocket and placed it next to the time turner. "You guys are really lucky," an auror next to her suddenly said, then waved his wand and removed some tiny plant seeds or leaves from the Granger siblings. "Judging from these things, you should have gone to some summer before. Fortunately, you can remember the dangers of changing history and made corresponding preparations, plus the time of backtracking is not too long, so you can be safe and sound." "Yes, Mr. Granger and Miss Granger, you two are very lucky," Professor McGonagall said after carefully examining the broken time turner. "Obviously, that gold chain should have been attached with powerful magic power before and induced the power of the time turner, causing this serious accident. It's a pity that the specific situation can't be analyzed now. However, as an animagus, what I need to say is that normal animagus transformations will carry the clothes on the body together for transformation, and the only exception is certain powerful magical items, because the magic power radiation released from powerful magical items will interfere with animagus transformation, and I think this should be the reason why this illegal animagus wrapped the gold chain around the rat's body." Because Professor McGonagall explained this way, everyone subconsciously ignored Hugo's previous time travel, and then refocused their attention on the rat. "Let me do it." Professor McGonagall took out her wand and pointed it at the rat. Then emitted a blue-white light. In the light, the originally unconscious Scabbers suddenly woke up and struggled frantically in the air. Then, the rat rolled off the table onto the floor, and then in the blue-white light, it first stretched out its head, and then its limbs, as if in a fast-forward scene. Finally, a dirty and balding man stood in the headmaster's office. His appearance was like that of a fat person who had lost a lot of weight in a short period of time, and the skin exposed by his clothes looked dirty. His pointed nose and watery little eyes still had the characteristics of a rat, looking like the rat people in those games who like to say yes, yes. "Oh, Peter, is that you?" Professor Dumbledore calmly adjusted his glasses, as if he often saw rats suddenly turn into a person. "Headmaster, is that you?" Peter tried hard to put on a calm image. But after being stared at by Dumbledore's blue eyes behind his lenses, the sound of his speech became smaller and smaller, and finally he closed his mouth. "It's really been a long time. It's really been a long time." Dumbledore didn't seem to notice Peter's embarrassment at all, but instead showed a very gentle smile on his face. However, his eyes were as cold as ice. "I heard that you have been staying in the Weasley family as a rat for more than 10 years. Can you tell me why you did this?" Chapter 296 The Truth. "I'm just scared," Peter Pettigrew shrieked, trying to conceal his inner unease. "What if the Dark Lord's followers find me? I sent their most capable henchman to Azkaban, that traitor, Sirius Black, but Sirius was later imprisoned in Azkaban. You could have come out then," Professor McGonagall said, looking at Peter. "Your mother was still alive then. She thought of you until her death, but always believed you were dead, because I was afraid." Perhaps because it was McGonagall asking and not Dumbledore, Peter seemed a little calmer. "I was worried that some of those who escaped the net would retaliate against me, maybe even kill my mother." "You're lying," the Ministry of Magic official said angrily. "I am Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. According to the information I have, the British magical world recovered quickly after the Dark Lord fell. The threat you describe simply didn't exist. I told you, I'm timid. After being questioned by Madam Bones, Peter blinked and then defended himself, so I was very worried about those dark wizards, especially Sirius Black's revenge. You know, Sirius blew up half a street with one curse. I was really scared that time, but if you're really that timid, why would you actively go to avenge the Potters? Madam Bones's lips curled slightly upward, and then she said, I know you might say it was the friendship between you and the Potters that made you do it, but it's hard for me to believe that someone who is too timid to appear before his own mother would risk his life for friendship. This, perhaps because he had been a rat for too long. Peter clearly had some problems with his brain, so just a few simple questions left him stammering. All right, Headmaster. I think many things are clear now. Madam Bones turned to Dumbledore at this time and said, clearly, there were some things we didn't know about in Sirius Black's case before. So I hope to borrow this place of yours to conduct a temporary interrogation, in order to find out the final truth of this matter as much as possible. Madam Bones was a decisive Ministry of Magic official, so after discovering the problem here, she immediately decided to conduct an on-site interrogation, in the headmaster's office. Then, Headmaster Dumbledore was clearly not bothered by conducting an interrogation in his office. Do you need any help from us? No, thank you. Madam Bones shook her head and said, we have all the items needed for the interrogation, and my two colleagues are also very good at this kind of work. Unlike Muggle police officers, Aurors are actually more like elite special agents. So, in addition to combat, they are also good at a series of search or interrogation tasks. So, after obtaining Madam Bones's permission, an Auror walked directly towards Peter, who was slumped on the ground, and took out a small bottle containing a transparent liquid from his pocket at the same time. No, you can't do this. Seeing the Auror approaching step by step with a small bottle, Peter shouted hoarsely, the use of Veritaserum is restricted. You're right, but as the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, I have the right to issue an order to use Veritaserum, Madam Bones said, staring at Peter at this moment. The Auror walked to Peter's side and used a spell to force him to open his mouth, and then dripped 3 drops of Veritaserum into it in the other party's desperate eyes. Only a few seconds after the potion entered his mouth, Peter stopped struggling. His eyes became blank, and his whole body relaxed. Bones pointed her wand and conjured a chair, then conjured ropes from the air and tied Peter to it. Okay, now tell me, who betrayed the Potters back then, and what exactly happened in that fight between you and Sirius? After Peter was tied up, Director Bones immediately began the interrogation. Under the effect of the potion, Peter confessed everything, how he had turned to Voldemort back then, how he had betrayed the Potters, and how he had framed Sirius after the record was completed. Bones and the two Aurors took Peter, still under the influence of the potion, and hurriedly left using the fireplace in the headmaster's office. Apparently to deal with this matter immediately. I never thought that the traitor would be the shy little boy who looked so shy back then. After Madam Bones and the two Ministry of Magic officials left, Professor McGonagall shook her head and then sighed. I suspected Sirius back then, and I also suspected Lupin. But I never suspected that little boy who was always following behind the 4 of them, and who is often overlooked. To think that Sirius has been with those dreadful Dementors in Azkaban for so many years, how much suffering he must have endured. And I actually thought he was a traitor. Actually, everyone has done something wrong. For example, I should have realized that this trial was problematic back then, and then demanded a retrial. Professor Dumbledore pulled out some tissues from the desk and handed them to Professor McGonagall. But the good thing is that we still have the chance to correct our mistakes now, even if it's too late, but it's at least better than not correcting them. For example, I can now write letters to my old friends and ask them to urge the Ministry of Magic to deal with this matter as soon as possible and exonerate Sirius. After making the arrangements, Professor Dumbledore focused his attention on Hugo and the others at this time. He first glanced at Hugo and the others waiting beside him, and then announced, Mr. Granger and Miss Granger, I am very happy that you were able to assist Professor Halsey in catching this criminal and exonerating an innocent person. So you can each add 50 points to Ravenclaw. However, I hope that you can keep the secret for the time being. Of course, this confidentiality does not need to be permanent. It will be enough after the Ministry of Magic announces the verdict. No problem, Headmaster. Hugo and Hermione nodded at the same time and replied, then walked out of the headmaster's office together. And the Enterprise was left in the office to deal with some other issues. I'm a little curious about one thing, Hermione asked Hugo on the way. If Peter is really a subordinate of the Dark Lord and has the hatred of killing Harry's parents, then why didn't he kill him after living with Harry for so long? It's easy to understand, Hugo smiled. Peter is not a brave person, so he naturally wouldn't put himself in danger in order to kill Harry. So, in this case, the other party will make certain considerations. For example, if the Dark Lord returns again, he may take Harry to ask for credit. And if Sirius dies in Azkaban, he can also jump out and say that he has been silently protecting Harry. That's really disgusting. Hermione's face showed a look of disdain, because Peter's actions had broken through the lower limit of human morality, and no normal person could accept it. Yes, humans are indeed a strange creature. When they are kind, they can be like angels, but once they become evil, they will be more evil than demons. Chapter 297. Open the ship suit and clear it up. Due to the many things that had happened before, Hugo and Hermione were both very tired. Therefore, after leaving the headmaster's office, they went straight back to their dormitories to rest after dinner. Hugo avoided the others and went straight to the room of requirement on the 8th floor of the castle. What are you doing? As soon as he entered, Hugo saw Veneto and Firefly standing at the door of the changing room, looking around as if waiting for someone. Hermione is inside trying to deploy her ship equipment for the first time, and we are waiting for her here. Firefly stared excitedly at the curtain at the door of the room. I'm quite curious about what your sister's ship girl form will be like. Actually, I'm quite curious too. Hugo stood beside Veneto and Firefly and waited as well. After all, they were worried that ship girl transformation might cause problems with space-time, so they didn't dare to deploy ship equipment during time travel for ship girls. Deploying ship equipment is an instinct. So even Hermione, who is a novice, completed the deployment work after only a dozen minutes of tinkering, finally finished deploying the ship equipment. I feel like I have 8 legs like a spider now. As the voice fell, Hermione walked out of the changing room. You look very different from usual. Hugo found that his sister was completely different from before, and it could even be said that even acquaintances might not recognize her at first glance, unlike her usual messy brown hair. After Hermione deployed her ship equipment, her hair turned into smooth golden long hair draped over her shoulders, and her eyes also turned sky blue. The clothes on her body were a set of military-style clothing. The upper body was a blue military uniform in the style of the Napoleonic era, and the lower body was a white long skirt. On her back was a set of ship equipment that didn't look much different from other Dido-class ships. The most special thing was her limbs. In this state, Hermione's joints and below the knees were all mechanical structures, revealing a cruel beauty. Your arms and legs. Hugo pointed to his sister's arms and legs and asked. In fact, he had always been very curious about what the body structure of the Dido class, which looked like mechanical prosthetics, was all about. They are no different from ordinary limbs. Hermione raised her hand to her eyes and clenched her fist. After all, I am a ship girl now. Is it strange that there are mechanical parts on my body? There's indeed nothing wrong with it. It even looks quite beautiful. Hugo suddenly realized that ship girls themselves were not flesh and blood, so whether the limbs were displayed in a mechanical state or the same as ordinary people, it was almost the same for them. In the following time, Hermione began to test her new form with the help of Firefly and Veneto. Although she couldn't use ship equipment weapons, the Admiral network was enough for them to conduct combat-like training. It seems that the weakest one here has become me again. Looking at the lightning-like movements of the 3 ship girls, including his sister, Hugo sighed helplessly, and then ran to the side to start practicing fighting and shooting. Perhaps because she was excited about mastering new power, Hermione seemed very excited during training that night. As a result, everyone returned to the dormitory to rest very late in order to accompany her. When Hugo opened his eyes the next morning, he found that he had gained 61 fate points. Obviously, this time his actions greatly changed the original plot. This was naturally very good news for Hugo, and after he spent a weekend in a very good mood. When he walked into the Great Hall on Monday, he found that the Great Hall was much noisier than usual, and everyone seemed to be discussing something. What happened? After sitting down in his seat, Hugo asked Hermione, who was sitting across from him. I feel like everyone is a little different from usual today. The serious black matter has a conclusion today, and everyone is discussing it, Hermione said, taking out a newspaper from beside her and handing it to Hugo, then smiled. The headmaster acted faster than we thought. Watching in the dark, a record of Sirius Black, who was wrongfully imprisoned for 12 years. At the first glance, Hugo saw such a title. Today's Daily Prophet's front page headline was an article by Rita Skeeter, in which she wrote in great detail about the entire process of Sirius Black's wrongful imprisonment, especially after describing Sirius Black's innocence with great detail in the front. The conversation changed and focused on the fact that the Ministry of Magic threw him into Azkaban without trial. What a terrible fact that one can be imprisoned in Azkaban without trial. There is no doubt that this means that the Ministry of Magic can put any innocent person in prison. Obviously, Rita Skeeter knew how to mobilize the emotions of the people. After all, an innocent person who has been in prison for 12 years may not arouse everyone's sympathy, but the idea that everyone has the possibility of being wrongfully in prison will inevitably arouse the empathy of everyone. In the following pages, the other party also described how Peter Pettigrew defected to Voldemort and betrayed the Potter couple, and then how he turned into a rat and survived for 12 years. Interestingly, in the back pages, Fudge blamed the misjudgment on the previous Minister of Magic and the Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and then guaranteed that similar practices such as the unified use of Veritaserum would be adopted in the future to avoid innocent people from being imprisoned again. In addition, the Ministry of Magic also announced Sirius Black's innocence and compensation plan. At the same time, it stated that all the Dementors who were originally outside would be returned to Azkaban. It was precisely because of this reason that everyone in the Great Hall now showed a smile. Because everyone had endured enough of that disgusting creature. Of course, there were also unlucky people in this atmosphere of universal joy. For example, Mr. Weasley was suspended from his job for investigation, because Peter had been hiding in his house for the past 12 years. I heard that you and Professor Halsey found Peter together yesterday, just as he was walking out after breakfast. The Weasley twins approached and said, "Yes." Hugo nodded. "I'm very sorry that your father was implicated in this matter." No, we are here specifically to thank you." Hearing Hugo's apology, Fred shook his head and said, "Thanks to your help, we were able to eliminate this Death Eater hidden by our side." That's right, the thought that a murderer who killed more than a dozen people in one breath has been by our side for more than 10 years has awakened our mother from her dream several times, George said. "So, she specifically wrote a letter asking us to thank you. Otherwise, if Peter really hurt our relatives or friends one day, it would be too late to regret it. As for my father, you don't need to worry. This is just a simple review. It won't affect too much. Moreover, my father also said that these punishments are what he should bear. After all, he was the one who picked Peter up in the yard back then." After that, Harry and Ron also ran over during class to thank the Granger siblings. Especially for Harry, this meant that he, who had always been an orphan, finally had his own real relatives. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298. The dust has settled. While Hugo and the others were in the Great Hall accepting the Weasley families and Harry's thanks, Enterprise was in the woods on the edge of Hogsmeade talking to Sirius. "You see, just like I promised you, the injustice against you has been cleared." Enterprise looked at Sirius opposite her. "What do you plan to do next?" "I want to go and see Harry," Sirius said. "You were right before. I was indeed running away at the time, so much so that Harry had so many years of hardship, so I plan to compensate Harry well in the next period of time, at least to make up for all the things I owe him over the years, so that my heart can be slightly less guilty." Speaking of this, Sirius straightened his body and prepared to walk towards the castle, but was directly stopped by Enterprise. "I have to say that the Royal Mage's counterattack is indeed very powerful." So even after feeding Sirius dog food for a few months, Sirius looked much stronger than when he had just escaped from prison. "Why are you stopping me?" Sirius asked, turning his head, after struggling twice without being able to shake off Enterprise's hand on his shoulder. "Please, take a look at yourself first. Do you think you look suitable to see your godson like this?" Enterprise said, taking out a mirror and handing it to Sirius. Sirius lowered his head and saw a disheveled middle-aged man in the mirror, looking as down and out as the darkest wizards in Nocturne Alley. After all, Enterprise had been hiding her relationship with Retaliation and the others from Sirius, and when she handed Sirius over, she only said it was pet care. So, during this time, Sirius had been staying in Retaliation's shop in dog form, so his clothes were naturally as tattered as when he had just escaped from prison. "You're right, I can't see Harry with such a down-and-out image." Sirius nodded and said, "I should tidy myself up and dress up well, so he doesn't feel like his godfather is a tramp." So then, Enterprise paraded Sirius to the Leaky Cauldron in London, and after washing and dressing him up, took him to the entrance of Hogwarts. Time passed quickly to noon, and almost all the students were eating lunch in the Great Hall. Just as everyone was discussing the news from this morning, Enterprise walked into the Great Hall with a middle-aged man. He is Sirius Black. A sharp-eyed Gryffindor student pointed at Sirius and shouted loudly. After all, Sirius's photo was posted everywhere this year, making it hard for people not to recognize him. What's Sirius Black? Where is he? Realizing that the person following Enterprise was Sirius, the Great Hall immediately became noisy, because everyone wanted to know what this now famous person in the wizarding world looked like. Soon, Sirius walked up to Harry and said a few words to him. Then he walked directly with him into a small room at the back of the Great Hall. Obviously, the godfather and godson had some things to say at this time. Great, I finally don't have to stay with my aunt and uncle during the summer vacation. When he was doing homework in the library that afternoon, Harry said excitedly in a low voice to the Granger siblings sitting opposite him, Sirius is my godfather. He told me he has a big house, and if I want, I can live with him during the summer vacation. Congratulations, congratulations. Looking at Harry's excited face, Hugo and his sister congratulated Harry together. After all, Harry had found his only relative now. However, Harry's plan to stay with Sirius during the summer vacation may be ruined because as long as Harry stays with his relatives, he can strengthen the protective magic that Lily cast in the first place, preventing Voldemort from harming him. So Professor Dumbledore is unlikely to allow Harry and Sirius to live together during the summer vacation. However, Hugo was not so disappointed as to say this out loud at this time. After all, Harry and Sirius had just met, and it would be a bit of a downer for him to say this fact. And after Harry expressed his gratitude, Ron also expressed his gratitude to the Granger siblings. The reason he was grateful was because he had received a letter from his cousin. Usually, Ron is a little invisible person at home. After all, he is the sixth child in the family, with 5 older brothers and 1 younger sister, so everyone's attention is often not focused on him. And after Hugo and the others met the Pratt family during the Christmas holiday, Miss Pratt, who had always thought she was a Muggle-born witch, began to write letters to the Weasley family. After receiving the letter, Mrs. Weasley was very happy. Because of the Wizarding War, she had almost completely lost contact with this relative of hers. This is why they didn't talk about this relative of theirs before, because they didn't understand each other at all except for simple information. As for Ron feeling happy, it was because he gained from this cousin the sense of recognition and need from relatives that he had never felt before. Unlike his usually busy brothers, he had a lot of free time to explain things about the British wizarding world to his cousin. And this naturally gave him a certain sense of being needed from his cousin. For Harry, the departure of the Dementors was a long sigh of relief. Because this kind of thing obviously has a stronger impact on him. Also because of this reason, even if he doesn't need to face the threat of Dementors for the time being, Harry still decided to follow Lupin to learn how to use the Patronus charm. However, what Hugo didn't expect was that this series of things he had done before had dug a big hole for his team. Even with Cho Chang having a powerful new broom, Ravenclaw still lost to Gryffindor in the final. This defeat was partly because Harry had a broom of the same level, and partly because Harry's condition had been so good during this time after having his godfather and obtaining permission to go to Hogsmeade. However, on the other hand, this final game also became the peak battle of the Nimbus 3 broom. Everyone clearly saw the absolute advantage of this broom over other brooms, and after the final ended, Salem told Hugo that she had received 6 broom orders from the UK in one day, which far exceeded the usual level of 2 orders in 3 days. Considering that this broom is equivalent to a top luxury sports car in the ordinary human world, then it is indeed very impressive to be able to sell this number of brooms in one day without similar organizations such as Quidditch organizing group purchases. And more than half a month later, the trial of Sirius Black finally ended. Sirius Black himself was completely exonerated, while Peter was proven to be the real mastermind and was stripped of his Order of Merlin and sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban. But the bad thing is that, realizing that his situation was not good, Peter said a lot of things during the trial. In addition to Sirius being an illegal animagus, the other party also exposed Lupin's werewolf identity. Chapter 299 Lupin and Chapter X27, S Departure and the End of the Semester. After Remus Lupin's werewolf identity was exposed, Hogwarts received a large number of letters that day because parents were unwilling to have a werewolf as a professor at the school. You actually could have stayed, Kiyu said, arriving at the Defense Against the Dark Arts office after hearing that Professor Lupin was leaving. I think the school board should be able to fight for it a bit more, thank you, but this is a voluntary resignation, Lupin said, commanding a thick stack of books to line up and walk into the suitcase. Then turning to Ki Yi, I shouldn't add more trouble to Headmaster Dumbledore. More importantly, werewolves are indeed very dangerous in a school. I'm thinking, what if I really bite a student? That would be terrible. Well, then I can only wish you all the best in the future. Kiyu nodded and then asked, have you found your next job yet? If you haven't, I happen to know of a job that might be suitable for you. Next job? Almost the entire British wizarding world knows I'm a werewolf now. How could anyone be willing to hire me? Lupin turned around and gave a wry smile. Fortunately, a professor's salary isn't low. So, if I'm frugal, I can last for a while. If it really doesn't work out, I might leave Britain and go to America to look for a job, but I really do know of a shop in Diagon Alley that is recruiting werewolves, Kiyu said, handing Lupin the address of the unwavering shop. They have already hired at least 30 werewolves there. I specifically observed this shop before and found that the people they hire are mainly marginalized figures in the wizarding world. It seems the shop owner is inclined towards charity work. If that's the case, then I'll go take a look, Lupin said, smiling as he took the slip of paper that Kiyu handed him. For him, finding a job was a difficult matter, so he certainly wouldn't give up if there was a chance. However, I'm a little worried whether this shop is still recruiting werewolves, Lupin said with a bitter face, as if thinking of something after putting away the slip of paper, because I heard that Umbridge is drafting an anti-werewolf law. That person is a standard politician, and the most heartless kind, Kiyu said, looking angry at the mention of Umbridge because recently, this guy's new Ministry of Magic recruitment standards have modified several key areas, and after the modifications, it is significantly more difficult for Muggle-born wizards to enter the Ministry of Magic. However, the shop I introduced to you not only has branches in Britain, but also in mainland Europe and the United States. So, you can work in Britain as someone dispatched from the European or American branches. When it comes to exploiting legal loopholes, those American shipgirls have a certain specialty in this area. So, after this law is promulgated, all the werewolves at Unwavering have become dispatch workers from American or European shops. If that's the case, that would be great. I will go and see this shop, Lupin said, clearly tempted after all. Finding a job was a rather difficult matter for him, so he wouldn't give up such a good opportunity, even if there was only a 1% chance. Just after the two of them finished talking about this matter, Harry and Ron walked in. Seeing this, Kiyu greeted them and then left the office 10 minutes later. When Kiyu looked out of her office window, she saw Lupin carrying his battered suitcase out of the castle and walking down the path away from the castle. For the rest of the semester, Kiyu took over the job of defense against the dark arts professor. For most of the students, her level was obviously much stronger than the previous professors. It's such a pity. If Professor Halsey could have continued teaching, that would have been great, Terry Boots said in the Ravenclaw common room after a defense against the dark arts lesson. Unfortunately, when I asked her how long she would be teaching us at the end of the lesson, she said she would only teach until the end of this semester and wouldn't extend it to the next semester. Actually, Professor Dumbledore once hoped that Professor Halsey would continue teaching, but she refused, Marietta said, as the most well-informed person in Ravenclaw. The reason the professor refused is because she discovered that there is indeed a complex curse on this position, so it's more appropriate not to take on this job for personal safety. Finally, exam week was over. This year, Hermione looked much better when she finished her exams than in previous years. On the one hand, she directly gave up Muggle studies after the time turner broke last time, and on the other hand, Hermione's new body was indeed much stronger than before. At least, compared to the flesh and blood of normal humans, the bodies of shipgirls, composed of energy and steel, were much stronger. For example, Hermione could easily study continuously for 72 hours without any rest. However, even so, human habit still slowed down Hermione's learning speed. So, she didn't manage to outperform Veneto and Firefly in this year's exams again. I should have realized long ago that my method of memorizing knowledge should be completely different from the past. For example, when memorizing some knowledge, there's no need to repeatedly memorize it several times. Just look at it once, and that's enough. When everyone received their end-of-term exam records and boarded the Hogwarts Express, Hermione muttered softly, while Firefly and Veneto, sitting opposite the Granger siblings, giggled beside her. Obviously, for the shipgirls, seeing a newly awakened compatriot encountering this kind of problem was a very interesting thing, and it might become a topic of conversation for a long time to come. You're here. I've been looking for you for a long time. Just as Hugo and the others were discussing the end-of-term exams, the door of the train compartment opened, and the Weasley twins walked in from outside. What's the matter? Hugo asked, looking curiously at the two people who walked in. "It's great that you're all here. I wanted to ask if you know whether the Golden Hog General Store is recruiting pure-blood wizards," Fred said. "We heard that the shop is recruiting summer workers, but it seems they mainly recruit Muggle-born wizards, occasionally some half-blood wizards, but never pure-blood wizards." "That's not right. That shop never looks at bloodlines when recruiting employees," Firefly said. "It's just that generally pure-blood families and pure-blood wizards are basically unwilling to work in a place full of Muggle-born wizards." "That's right. I heard my sister say this before," Veneto added at this time. "There was once a Slytherin graduate who wanted to come, but gave up as soon as he saw the staff there, and when he left, he specifically shouted loudly at the entrance of the shop, saying that this shop was like a cesspit, constantly emitting the stench of Muggles. We are not those filthy Slytherins, and we certainly don't have such disgust and discriminatory thoughts," George said loudly after hearing what that Slytherin graduate had done before, and Fred nodded in agreement beside him. "Of course, I believe you," Veneto nodded and said. "And compared to other people, I believe you should be able to get along well with everyone." Chapter 300 Go Home. It was perfectly normal for the Weasley twins to want to work at Nocturne Alley. After all, the Weasley family's finances had always been tight, so it was normal for the children to want to go out and earn some money when they grew up, especially with the Quidditch World Cup competition this year. If the Weasley twins wanted to take this opportunity to promote their products, then saving some money to buy materials would become a very necessary thing. "By the way, if you want to come out, will Mrs. Weasley agree?" Hugo asked suddenly, looking at the Weasley twins with smiles on their faces. "I remember Percy seemed to have gotten all O's in his NEWT exams this year. If you compare that, your OWL exams this year, can we not mention this?" After being said this by Hugo, the Weasley twins both showed depressed expressions on their faces. After all, their exam results this year were indeed a bit miserable, although according to their plan, they didn't need OWL exam results to open a joke shop. Mrs. Weasley still hoped that they could enter the Ministry of Magic like their father. This difference in thinking was very normal. After all, children hoped to go out and make their own way when they grew up, while parents hoped that they could have a stable job, so naturally there would be conflicts in ideas. However, for the Weasley twins, Mrs. Weasley's lethality after seeing the transcript was comparable to a dragon, and their desire to find a summer job was not without the hope of avoiding their mother's thoughts as an outsider. Hugo naturally couldn't say anything about this kind of thing. Fortunately, he knew that the Weasley twins did have unprecedented talent in this area, so they should have a way to convince their mother with their achievements. "By the way, there's the Quidditch World Cup this summer. Will you go?" Realizing that the atmosphere was a bit awkward, Hermione changed the subject and asked the Weasley twins. "We will definitely go, because my father always has a way to get tickets from the ministry for this kind of event. By the way, will you guys come to watch the game?" "We will go together," Firefly thought for a moment and said. "Because our sisterhood just happens to know the manufacturer of the Nimbus 3 broom, and the other party, as a sponsor, said they can get the top tickets for the finals." "Sounds absolutely amazing." The twins looked at each other and said, "After all, what kind of tickets my father can get depends purely on luck." Soon, the train arrived at King's Cross Station. When they walked out of the platform, they found that Hood and St. George were standing on the platform with Littlehouse, waiting for them because the Granger couple happened to be on a business trip to the Far East again. They entrusted Hugo and Hermione to Hood. This was very good news for Hugo and them, just right to do some things that were not convenient for their parents to know. So, after greeting a few acquaintances and friends, Hugo and they split up and got into two cars, and then drove directly towards the west. "I'm glad you've become one of us, so next you'll see with your own eyes the secrets we've been hiding. Of course, these secrets are naturally not suitable for public disclosure." After the car started, Hood said to Hermione, who was sitting in the seat behind her, while driving, "And in the next half-month of activities, we will all help you completely master your power, because Hermione's identity has changed now. There is no need to hide many things from her as before." So the car did not go to the Granger's house, but went straight to Hood's residence in London. When the group arrived at the residence, they did not enter directly as before, but bypassed the main building and came to the backyard surrounded by walls. After everyone was standing in the yard, Hood, who was in the lead, patted a modular brick on the wall with her hand, and a stone sculpture in the backyard directly shifted laterally by more than 2 meters, and then revealed a downward tunnel. "This is our secret chamber." Hermione, who came here for the first time, looked curiously at the entrance lit with dim yellow light. But why doesn't this secret chamber look like it has any magical traces? It was normal for Hermione to ask such a question, because this place looked like an ordinary basement, and for wizards, the current basement was no different from being undefended, because the core of this basement is concealment, not defense, Hood said, walking in the front. And such a room with no imitation traces in an ordinary residential area will generally not arouse suspicion from others. It's like when a person wants to protect a certain treasure. Choosing to use various security systems and personnel to set up layers of defense is naturally a very good choice, but if you hide the treasure in a remote wilderness, in an unknown deep mountain forest, the effect is the same. After walking down the stairs for a minute or two, everyone came to the main part of this underground hideout. As expected, this hideout did not have too many decorations. It looked full of the feeling of a military basement. We have specially soundproofed this place, and we have also done a series of defenses, St. George introduced proudly, because we have reinforced these spaces with battleship main armor belt steel plates, so we can carry out a series of training here. After a brief introduction, Hermione followed St. George and the others to the training ground to start training. And Hugo and Hood came to another room. Finally home. Is there anything going on now? Just as he walked into this room, a ball of light suddenly appeared on Hugo's shoulder, and then Victory came out of it. How is Ariana's, or rather, Ella's current situation? Seeing Victory fly down from his shoulder and turn into human size standing in front of him, Hugo asked her, theoretically speaking, this conversion should be completed in only 100 days, but the actual situation was not like this. At least 100 days after returning to the current time and space, this soul had still not been completely converted. Victory and Hugo, who felt something was wrong at the time, also took the time to thoroughly check this soul after discovering that the resurrection time was different from the estimated time. As a result, they found that the reason for the difference from the estimate was because they estimated according to normal circumstances, and did not consider the possible problems of using the soul of a deceased person for conversion. Fortunately, this mistake was only a very small mistake, which would only slow down the conversion speed. So it would not cause too much harm to the matter itself. It was only because of this situation that Hugo could not estimate how long the overall conversion would take, so he had no choice but to let Victory keep an eye on it, and call him as soon as the conversion was over. I was just about to tell you about this, Victory said. The conversion was over when we were on the train back. It's just that I didn't think it was suitable to summon the second system spirit on the road, so I didn't tell you. You did the right thing. Then let's start our summoning now. Saying that, Hugo nodded to Victory and Hood, and then, under the protection of the two of them, began to summon this new system spirit. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.